Chapter 2199. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Hand over. Of course I'm not as good as Shang-Ji Godly Master and Tian Du, said White God, glancing at the majestic being to the right of Jun Mo. Tian Du turned a blind eye to that, as if he hadn't heard anything. Wu Xiang stood in front of Azura Palace, looking at the two top-tier great beings from the godly king powers. He sneered inwardly. They seemed to be in cahoots, but they didn't want to waste their power. This was a good thing for Azura Feng. Thus, the situation continued to be in a stalemate. White God and Shang-Ji kept talking to each other. Jun Mo pretended to be polite, and Tamanaji became more and more anxious. Unfortunately, neither side really attacked Azura Feng. After all, they didn't know how much power Azura God had left. However, the stalemate didn't last long. A beam of black godly light pierced through the void space like an arrow, and a group of elite figures landed on Azura Feng's dojo. When the group of figures appeared, Jun Mo and Tamanaji stood up at the same time. They looked over and saw the silver-haired young man in the crowd. It was none other than Qin Hao. "You're indeed hiding in the massacre world," said Jun Mo, whose polite face became ferocious. His eyes were filled with murderous intent and resentment. After the battle in the Sword World, he had always thought that Qin Hao had been stranded in the wilderness, and the sky eye opened by the godly king's seal couldn't be wrong. However, Jun Mo had repeatedly come to investigate and search, trying to force Qin Hao to come out, but to no avail. At that time, he had been very conflicted, and he had once doubted himself. However, after Ghost Nest's probing, he was completely convinced that Qin Hao was in the massacre world, and he was very close to Azura. Now, his guess had become reality. "Azura God, please hand him over." Tamanaji looked down at the exit coldly. He glanced at Ji Xiang and felt his aura. Why was it so similar to Wu Xiang's? Two Azura gods? Tamanaji shook his head and found that it wasn't an illusion, but it didn't matter. He only wanted Qin Hao, or more precisely, the mirror of reincarnation on Qin. At this moment, after Qin Hao returned to his original appearance, he met Jun Mo's gaze. Looking at the Cloud Pool Immortal Army and the Tian Zhao Army, his heart trembled slightly. No wonder. Translation. Translation, 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 translation. Qin Hao spread out his immortal will and glanced at Tian Du, who was next to Yu Liuji, and Bai Shen, who was next to him. He found that the aura of those two deities was very close to that of a superior deity, which showed how powerful their cultivation was. Even if they hadn't comprehended the desolation intent, they weren't far from it. They had at least reached the limit of the peak of the Divine Master realm. Other than them, there was also Fun Wei, Xian Qi, Tianyin, and another elderly Divine Master. 3 great gods, second only to Divine Kings, and 4 secondary Divine Masters. Such a lineup was truly astonishing. Moreover, the immortal army sent by the heavenly Zhao Divine Realm and the immortal army sent by the immortal realm of the Yunzi Divine Realm were the best of the best. Jun Mo and Tamanaji had obviously put in a lot of effort. Compared to the battle in Endless Godly Domain, the enemies Azura Feng faced today were even more terrifying. "Senior," Qin Hao said to Ji Xiang Azura. "Shut up," Ji Xiang said lifelessly. His eyes did not even look at Qin Hao. "From now on, without my order, you are not to say a word." The forces of 2 great divine kings were pressuring them, and their lineup was so strong that even if Ji Xiang had more tricks up his sleeve, it would still be useless. However, this did not mean that he was afraid. On the contrary, there was no fear in the Azura god's eyes. Just like how there was no fear in the hearts of all living beings in the world of slaughter, there was only slaughter. Death was where they truly belonged. Understood. Qin Hao lowered his head slightly and sighed inwardly. This scene was very similar to the one in Ghost Nest Dojo. Back then, Azura had also warned Qin Hao not to act rashly without his orders. In the end, Qin Hao had not listened. Today, Azura Phone was not in Ghost Nest, and Junimo was surrounded by even more great beings. Even if Qin Hao listened to Azura this time, it would still be difficult for Azura to come up with a countermeasure. Ji Xiang and Ji Xiang looked at each other silently. Then Ji Xiang stepped back and let Ji Xiang take charge of the situation. In terms of strength, 2 Ji Xiang were no match for 1 Ji Xiang. However, Ji Xiang also had his shortcomings. For example, he was not as good as Ji Xiang when it came to stabilizing the morale of the army and rallying people. "Your Highnesses, why have you come here?" Ji Xiang asked, even though he already knew the answer. "The path of killing is really mysterious. I can't even tell which one is the real Azura god." Junimo sighed and shook his head. Then his eyes flashed and he pointed at Qin Hao in the center of the dojo. "Azura, let's not mince words. This person is from the Archean world and is my mortal enemy. He also took my chaotic godly weapon for no reason. The enmity between us is not something you can resolve with just a few words." "Your Highness Junimo must be joking," Ji Xiang said with a cold smile. "He is from the slaughter world and cultivates my path of killing. How did he become from the Archean world?" "Azura, don't force me. The last god master who talked nonsense with me was already dead." The viciousness in Jun Mo's eyes intensified. "Hand him over. I won't start a war with the slaughter world, and I don't want to make you an enemy. It's the same for His Highness you. But if you insist on doing this and want to sacrifice the lives of all the creatures in the world to stand up for this kid, then I can only be merciless." Junimo had destroyed a world before. He did not care about destroying a second god world, even if it was once a god king's force. "Yunzei generals." Tamanaji raised his arm high. Buzz. In the void, the Yunzei army, which was in a square formation, took a step forward in unison. Rays of dazzling heavenly wheel radiance bloomed at the same time. The mighty divine light radiated for thousands of miles, illuminating half of the massacred divine realm. He had once given Qin Hao a chance, but he did not cherish it. Since that was the case, Tamanaji would also be an executioner. In order to get the reincarnation mirror, he did not mind staining his hands with blood. Who is making a fuss here? People who don't know would think that some wild dog has jumped out. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Rays of divine light descended from the sky and landed on the Shura training hall. The elites of the Yellow Springs God World, the elites of the Ghost World, and the elites of the Nether Devil World appeared in the vision of Junimo and Tamanaji. They formed an extremely majestic team with the Shura guards on the peak. "Yellow Springs God Lord." Junimo frowned. Gui Di and you Demon Lord had both arrived so quickly. Had they discussed it? "Oh, so it's His Highness Junimo. Not a wild dog." Yellow Springs raised his head and shouted to the sky with his hands behind his back. His imposing body was like a sturdy statue pressing down on the training hall. However, when he saw the lineup brought by Junimo and Tamanaji, his heart trembled. As expected, they were worthy of being called troublesome characters by his fourth brother. Upper Extremity, Tiandu, and God Bai. These three were enough to fight against the four brothers. Moreover, they might not be at a disadvantage. After all, Shura was not the Shura at his peak. The strength of Yellow Springs and the other two was much weaker than Shura. If they were to fight, it was very likely that they would be suppressed by Upper Extremity. "Yellow Springs Godlord, I trust you have been well since we last met. First of all, the voice just now was not mine. It was His Highness Yu of the Yunzei Divine Realm." Junimo replied with a sullen face. "Wild dog." Chapter 2200. 114 Chinese Network Primordial Alchemy Venerable. Chapter 2200. Return Azure. Dignified divine prince being called a wild dog was extremely insulting. How could Jun Mo Xie accept such a label? Despite his fury, Tamanaji tried his best to suppress it. He turned to the Divine Lord of Netherworld and said loudly, "Divine Lords, His Royal Highness and I are only here to take one person away. We don't want to bring trouble to those who have nothing to do with us. However, if you try to challenge the authority of the divine realm of Yunza, I'm not afraid to fight, nor will I show any mercy." Divine Lord Yellow Springs, Divine Lord Guadi, Divine Lord Umo, you must seriously think this through. The underworld no longer exists, and now that you have established your own businesses, do you want to give up your own divine world for a remnant that has nothing to do with the slaughter world? Jun Mo's lips curled into a cold smile. Isn't it good to maintain the status quo? It's not easy for the Nether Realm to keep 4 divine masters. Is it worth it to dig your own grave for an outsider? I hope the Yellow Springs Divine Masters can calm down and not act on impulse like the Azura Divine Master. While you're at it, help me persuade him. I only want Qin Hao and the Mirror of Reincarnation. Jun Mo was not joking. Otherwise, he would not have brought such a large force. He hoped that Huang Quan and the others would consider the consequences. Fourth bro. Yellow Springs looked at Azura. I can give you the Chaos Divine tool, but I won't give you the person. Azura Ji Xiang said seriously. This was his bottom line. Absolutely not. I must have both. Jun Mo took a heavy step forward, and the army of the Tian Zhao God realm behind him also took a step forward in unison. Then why are you still talking nonsense with me? Come and fight me. Azura's black hair danced in the wind as his body floated up. The divine slaughter intent on his body grew stronger and stronger. At this time, the space suddenly became quiet. Jun Mo did not say a word. His narrowed pupils shone with sharpness. Jun Mo had inherited the tyranny and strength of God King Tianzhao, but he did not expect Azura to be even more arrogant than him. Fourth brother, is this worth it? Yellow Springs looked at the powerful Azura, his voice filled with vicissitudes. It had not been easy for the underworld to reach this point. Azura originally had the opportunity to take a step further towards the divine Tao. As long as he seized the power of the Earth God, before he returned, he should have extracted Qin Hao's strength by hook or by crook. At that time, even if he became Jun Mo's enemy, he would at least gain something. Yet now, he'd given up the opportunity to advance into the divine Tao, and he didn't hesitate to go to war with Jun Mo for the sake of the survivors of the Sword World. It was truly incomprehensible. Is it worth it? Azura's black hair fluttered in the wind as he smiled silently. Big brother, have you ever thought about the war between the underworld and the light realm back then? Was father's actions worth it? That battle caused the underworld to shatter. A glorious divine king's power was completely destroyed. Too many people died. The Azura 4 brothers lost too many people, including their younger sister, Ingsha. What if they didn't start a war? Perhaps his younger sister was still alive, and the underworld was still the underworld where deities filled the sky, and all the beautiful things would not disappear. But would the underworld king still be the underworld king? No, he would become a dog under the Light King's feet. From then on, the underworld god realm would submit to the light realm and become a vassal. Father must have thought about whether it was worth it or not, so he went to war with the Light King. In that battle, many lives around us were lost. What I did today was purely to save a life. Azura also found it laughable. He was the synonym of the death god, and he spread slaughter and death. Today, he didn't hesitate to mobilize the power of the entire realm just to save one person. And this person didn't seem to have any important relationship with him. Fourth brother, give up on your obsession. Guadi understood why Azura had become like this. If he handed over Qin Hao, the divine soul in Qin Hao's heavenly wheel that looked exactly like Ing Sha would definitely be buried with him. As for the reason why Azura was so determined, it was because of Miaoli. The person that he wanted to save was not Qin Hao, nor was it even Miaoli. Instead, it was Ing Sha, or rather, it was Azura himself. He wanted to make up for the regrets of the past, and he was trying to redeem himself. In this way, Azura's path could be released and liberated, and he could climb to a higher level. Azura guards! Azura Ji Xiang calmly called out. Instantly, all the murderous immortal generals and red-robed elites in the Taoist field slowly rose into the air. Countless black-robed immortal guards appeared on the originally dead and empty godly peak. More and more figures even jumped out of the huge gullies on the vast scorched land outside the peak. A large number of creatures were holding scythes that symbolized death. They marched toward Azura Peak in groups with rumbling footstep. Seeing this, Yellow Spring, Gui Di, and God Lord Umo all sighed sorrowfully. Heavenly Edict God King Army. Jun Mo clenched his fist above his head. Cloud Pool God Generals. Tamanaji pointed at Azura Dojo. Kill! The two divine princes called out at the same time. Immediately, space rumbled and whistled as the elites of the two divine kings viciously descended on the pitch-black and lonely divine peak like meteors. They wanted to destroy this world. Azura had already given them the order to fight. So at this moment, Junimo and Tamanaji showed no mercy. Kill! Azura Ji Xiang's body was the first to charge, but it was overtaken by a shadow behind it. It was Azura's evil face. The evil face activated the light wheel, and the boundless dark power of the great Tao enveloped the world, swallowing half the sky. The darkness surged forward like a tide, intending to crush the light of the heavenly edict army and the cloud pool immortal court. Dong! Dong! Two extremely heavy sounds broke through the air at the same time beside Jun Mo. Shangji and Tian Du advanced side by side, each in a direction, and converged on Azura's wisdom face and evil face. Among all the forces in the massacre world, the divine paths of the evil face and wisdom face were undoubtedly the strongest. If they wanted to destroy the creatures in this world, Shangji and Tian Du would have to kill Azura's two spirits here. At this moment, Qin Hao saw two extremely majestic light wheels radiating from Shangji and Tian Du. The light of the great Tao covered their entire bodies, and they were completely composed of light. There was no sign of the divine veins at all. These were the experts who had comprehended or were close to the primordial will. The divine veins could no longer distinguish their strength. This power was far above that of the divine masters. Boom! Amidst the deafening sound of exploding spirits, the 8 palms collided fiercely. The upper extreme fought the evil image, while the heavenly supervisor fought the wisdom image. Terrifying ripples of light swept out from the 4 figures, sweeping across the universe and tearing space apart. At this moment, Qin Hao once again encountered the collapse of the power of the world. Because the divine power of the 4 was too strong, the massacre world could not withstand it at all. Countless mountains collapsed, and underground magma spewed into the sky. The already crisscrossed huge ravines were torn apart even more severely. The whole scene was like the end of the world. The power of the Azura god is truly astonishing. It is hard to imagine how strong he would be if he was not injured. Qin Hao watched the battle and felt the aura of the 4 great gods. Because the power of the main body was divided, and the will of the way that the wisdom face possessed was not good at fighting, it was obviously not as strong as the Tian Du's power. As soon as they exchanged blows, the difference in power was clear. The wisdom face was weaker than the Tian Du, but on the other side, the evil face and Shangji were fighting each other with divine power, and they were not at a disadvantage at all. The divine light of the great path flowed on their bodies, and the endless power seemed to be hidden in each of their bodies. They were evenly matched. These were only the 2 spirits of Azura, and their power was already so amazing. What if they returned to their peak state? At this moment, Qin Hao could imagine how tragic the battle in the underworld was. It could even destroy Azura's spiritual soul. As expected of a terrifying existence who fought with a quasi-divine king. If Azura was not severely injured by the current Light King, Shangji would not be his opponent. Junemo gasped slightly. Fortunately, he had brought the Tiandu today. With the two of them holding the line, Azura could not do anything. Your Highness, it would be better for you to avoid being hurt, Xianqi said as he came over. Today's battle was not as one-sided as the battle in the Sword World. Azura's power was too shocking, and Xianqi understood that the four cultivators fighting now were far from showing their true power. No need. Junemo waved his hand. It was rare to see a battle close to the level of a divine king. As the divine prince, he needed to take this step in the future. He could not miss it. Glancing next door, Junemo said to Tamanaji, "Tamanaji, your people can't just watch, right?" They had agreed to fight together. Shangji, the Tiandu, and Azura were already fighting, but the Yunzi divine realm was not moving. The Tianzhou divine realm was responsible for the fighting, but what if they got the chaotic divine implement? Chapter 2201 Wulin Chinese Network Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Give me back your beauty with my ugliness, haha. Tamanaji understood what Junemo meant. He looked at the Shura guards who were fighting with the divine king of Tianzhou. With a wave of his hand, groups of white-armored Tianluan began to rush to the battle. He then said, "Uncle White, thank you." "You're welcome, Prince Yu." White God stood up from his chair. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and he wore a pure white robe. He put his hands behind his back and walked forward, ignoring the divine power that filled the sky. He just walked forward quietly. Everywhere he passed, countless black-robed Shura guards exploded. They were killed by his divine will. If this goes on, the slaughtering world will be finished. Nether clenched his fist slightly. Shangji and Tiandu had already put a lot of pressure on Shura. Now that God White had entered the Matrix, no one in the slaughtering world could compete with him. Although the Slayer was not bad, it was still far from the level of Shangji, Tiandu, and God White. The reality was just as Nether had guessed. Not long after God White entered the Matrix, the Slayer went up to meet him. The pitch-black Tianluan was released, and its aura was like that of Shura. Immediately, the Slayer went toward God White, but it only stopped him once. Then, it was constantly suppressed by God White's aura. No matter how it attacked, it could not shake him at all. How stupid. Guadi's chest was filled with resentment. He watched his former brother being killed. Even if he did not have a good impression of Shura, the feeling was not good. Why did he not want to hand him over? It was fine if he did not want to hand him over. The Earth Divine Power was so easy to get, but Shura did not want to take it. Elder Nether, Elder Guadi, are the three of you going to watch your former brother be killed without doing anything? At this moment, Qin Hao shouted at the three of them. You have no right to speak here, Guadi said ruthlessly. Did he want them to go up and help? What could he change? There were still other divine lords in the Tianzhou Divine King Army and the Yunzi Divine Realm Army. Even if Nether and the others were to enter the formation, they would still be restrained. As a result, the Nether World, the Ghost Realm, and the Nether Devil World might perish. Yellow Spring and the others weren't willing to watch with folded arms. The premise was that Azura could withstand the opponent's peak divine Tao. If the three divine masters entered the formation, they could break the delicate balance of the battle. Most importantly, based on the current situation, Ji Xiang would not be able to last long in the hands of the Sky Supervisor. There was no point in fighting a battle with an answer. Creak. Qin Hao clenched his fists. He was really cold-blooded. If it wasn't Junemo and Tamanaji who came today, but the Radiant God King instead, what would the seniors do? Miaoli, whose soul was already weak, once again left Qin Haotian's wheel. She floated in front of God Lord Netherworld and stared at him. Ing Sha. Yellow Spring looked at Muri's face in a daze. So similar. Unfortunately, you are not Ing Sha. Who I am is not important. Senior Yellow Spring, please answer this, Junior. What if it was the Radiant Divine Realm Army that suppressed Azura today? Muri continued. This. Yellow Spring was conflicted. The meaning was different. If the Radiant God King came, it would definitely be to destroy the four realms. However, Junimo only attacked the Massacre World. As long as Yellow Spring and the others didn't enter the formation, the Radiant Divine Realm wouldn't be affected. Haha, this Junior understands. I think the reason Mingzhan lost was because you brothers were not on good terms. Muri sneered. How could they not be defeated if they didn't help when they were dying? What do you know? Yellow Spring's dignified face glared angrily. In the battle of the underworld, they had done their best. Their mistake was that the radiant eldest son suddenly broke through to the God King realm and crushed the underworld. At that moment, not only did Ing Sha die, Azura's soul was also scattered. How could the underworld be a match for a God King without the underworld king? Don't think that just because you look similar to Ing Sha, you can bewitch us into intervening. Let me tell you, there is no if in this world. As long as Father's dark incantation is still present, the Radiant King will not come. Guedi said, but you too think about what will happen to you if Azura is defeated. Senior sister, these three people are inhumane. There is no need to talk nonsense with them. Qin Hao could see that perhaps Yellow Spring and the others also wanted Azura to die. Big brother, second brother, go help fourth brother, go help fourth brother, I beg you. Inexplicably, Muri seemed to be possessed by a soul. She grabbed Yellow Spring's wide sleeves with both hands and fell to her knees, crying on the spot. You! Yellow Spring was so shocked that he suddenly trembled. He looked down at Muri, at the face that was so similar, as if Ing Sha was kneeling in front of him. His heartstrings tightened, and he desperately told himself that the one under his feet was not Fifth Sister, it was fake. Yellow Spring wanted to hide, he wanted to break free from Muri's hands, but the more he did so, the more his state of mind was deeply affected. Big brother, calm down. She is not Ing Sha. Guedi's eyes were red, and his throat gradually became choked with sobs. Big brother, big brother, big brother, help fourth brother, help him! Muri cried loudly, and the more she cried, the louder her voice became. Her voice even reached the battlefield, affecting Azura's evil image and wisdom image, causing them to burst out even more ruthlessly and crazily. In fact, Miaoli didn't know Ing Sha. She didn't know anything about the other's personality and words. She only knew that Ing Sha was a close relative of the four former princes of Ming. From those words, she could vaguely see that Huang Quan and the others loved their sister very much. In the current situation, if Yellow Spring did not enter the array, Azura alone would not be able to hold on for long. As Qin Hao's senior sister, in order to let her junior brother live, she could only shamelessly pretend to be someone else's sister. Whether Yellow Spring admitted it or not, in short, crying was the right thing to do. Until the crying reached the pain of their souls, until they could not bear it and helped Azura. If Azura won, Qin Hao could live. The cries were like sobs. Tears blurred Muri's eyes, and it was Yellow Spring's eyes. He looked at the soul that was similar to his sister kneeling at his feet. He knew it was fake, but he believed it was real because the resemblance was too great. Finally, after repeated crying and begging, an extremely oppressive roar exploded from Azura's dojo. The flesh on Yellow Spring's body fell off one by one amidst Muri's cries, revealing a huge purple-gold skeleton filled with a destructive aura. For a moment she tried to escape, afraid that her ugly appearance would frighten the people she cared about. However, if this ugly appearance could save the remaining beauty in her heart, so what if the world could see it clearly? Yellow Spring went berserk. The huge skeleton flew past the black-robed divine guards in the sky, lifted up the slayer who was bitterly blocking the attack, and threw him to the back. The purple-gold hand bone that was as hard as steel grabbed White God's arm like a ghost. Wherever it grabbed, White God's divine power would constantly melt, followed by his clothes, and then his flesh until White God let out a hoarse scream. One of his arms turned into eerie white bones and was thrown high into the sky by Yellow Spring. Boom! The Yellow Spring bone guards who were guarding the road followed the Divine Lord's movement and erupted with the power of the bone path, turning into skeletons of all shapes and sizes. They carried spears and machetes and threw themselves into the battle. Yellow Spring Realm, enter the battle formation. Second brother, I beg you, second brother. The souls that were on the verge of collapse begged one by one. Their white palms clutched Guaidi's pants tightly. Muri saw blood seeping out from Guaidi's eyes. Why do you have to torture us like this? If only you were Ingsha. If only you called me big brother like now, there was no need to kneel. Whatever you want, second brother can give it to you. I can pick any star. Whatever Azura can do, I can do it too. Blood flowed out from his 7 orifices. A cold wind came like a wave. Guaidi's body was covered in blood and flesh. The rotten smell filled the air. The deformed body that was hidden under a normal person's body was revealed. Chapter 2202 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Waiting for an opportunity to kill the stench of corpses swept across the battlefield with the chilly wind. The blood-red light formed by the curse surrounded Guaidi. The ordinary facial features that he tried to maintain instantly became extremely terrifying, like a rotten corpse monster. Shura was the synonym of death, spreading death, blood, and killing. Guaidi was the source of all things fear, symbolizing disaster and misfortune. At this moment, he stretched out his bloody and festering palm and gently helped Muri up. He left a bloody footprint with each step, dragging the mountain of corpses on his back, and walked toward the battlefield of Shura Fong. There was no if in the world. Muri was not Ingsha, so she should cherish the present. Otherwise, the tragedy would repeat itself, and the next one to die would be Shura. After many years, when Guaidi recalled today, would he fall into regret and guilt for not lending a helping hand? Maybe, so one regret was enough. He couldn't save Ingsha, but he could fight side by side with Shura. On the training field, the corpses revealed the true appearance of the ghost guards as their clothes were torn apart. They spat out obscure curses and followed Guaidi's footsteps into the immortal army of Yunzhe Immortal Realm. In an instant, minced meat flew everywhere, and miserable howls sounded everywhere. The blood was like an ocean reflected in one's eyes. The curse power of the Ghost Realm's elites was absorbed into the bright and holy heavenly wheel of Yunzhe Immortal Realm's will, corroding their bodies, infecting their will, and evoking the long-buried fear of countless people. The entrance of the Netherworld Realm and the Ghost Realm caused a change in the battle situation. The Shura guards, who were originally weak, received great help and reduced the pressure caused by the 2 immortal kings. Looking at Guaidi, who was fighting with the Jade Mirage Emperor, Qin Hao and Muri sighed. Death and fear were not completely cold. Compared to the real mortal world, ghosts and skeletons were more humane. At least when the calamity came, Qin Hao and Muri saw more abandonment and survival in the mortal world. Few were like Huang Quan and Guaidi, who knew that they might not be able to change anything, but still chose to stand by Shura's side in the end. This was not because of Muri's disguise as Ingsha. In fact, it was because of the unbreakable bond between them. If you also call me third brother, perhaps I will consider making a move. God Lord Umo stood alone on the side, quietly waiting for Muri. However, the other party did not open her mouth to ask for help. Why was he treated differently from Huang Quan and Guaidi? People often say that a human's heart is uglier than a ghost. In my opinion, Sir Divine Master, you are even more unbearable than a human's heart. You can still be so calm when you see your 3 brothers in danger. Tell me, how cold are you? Muri looked at God Lord Umo. I will not beg you. If you want to enjoy the fall of Shura, Huang Quan and Gui Di, then enjoy it together. After all, I am not Ingsha. To be honest, Muri had nothing to do with Shura. Shura, Huang Quan and Gui Di were Umo's blood brothers. It was up to him whether he saved them or not. You win. God Lord Umo waved his hand. The demon soul guards that had been waiting for a long time all rushed forward, stabbing into the side of the Cloud Pool Divine Realm's immortal army like a shiny black knife. Taking a step in the air, when he passed by Muri, God Lord Umo looked back at Muri. To be honest, you are not as cute as Ingsha. Only the people I respect the most have the chance to see my cuteness. Muri revealed a faint smile. Can I gain your respect by killing a few divine masters? That will depend on third brother's ability. Muri changed the way she addressed him. God Lord Umo's deep eyes shone with an excited light. His loose robes fluttered in the wind as he charged towards the rear of the Heaven Edict God King army. Jun Mo was currently watching the battle with great interest. Senior sister, you are amazing. Qin Hao was sincerely impressed. What kind of people were Huang Quan, Gui Di and Umo? With just a few words, senior sister was able to incite them into joining the battle. She looked like she was willing to sacrifice herself for the greater good. Don't be so smug. This is all senior sister can do for you. The outcome of the battle is hard to predict. If you want to break out of this predicament, relying on Shura and the others is not enough. You have to rely on yourself. Muri knew that Huang Quan and the others were willing to help not only because of her. Even if they joined the battle, they would at most share some of Shura's pressure. Jun Mo's lineup was extremely strong. With Tamanaji's cooperation, every one of Huang Quan's members was dangerous. This was a true battle between tigers and wolves. I understand. Qin Hao nodded. As long as an opportunity presented itself, he would do his best to create a chance to turn the situation around. He did not have extravagant hopes of killing Jun Mo and forcing back the armies of the 2 divine kings. Muri's illusory soul did not return to Qin Hao's wheel of light. Her cultivation was not enough and she did not have a divine body, so she could not provide any substantial help to Qin Hao. However, she believed that her junior brother would definitely be able to survive this calamity. Perhaps after this, the situation Qin Hao would face would completely change. Boom boom boom. The void cried out incessantly. With Huang Quan delaying White God and Gui Di and Umo delaying the other divine lords, Shura could finally go all out. His battle with his superiors and Heaven Supervisor was extremely intense. Wu Xiang possessed 90% of the main body's battle strength. Up until now, there was still no clear difference in strength between him and his superiors. Their divine Tao auras were maintained at an absolute balance. No one could gain the slightest advantage. Of course, Ji Xiang was not good at fighting. Compared to the other divine Tao heavenly wheels, he was shockingly strong. However, he was facing Heaven Supervisor, the right-hand man of the Divine King. To a large extent, Heaven Supervisor was only allowed to stay in the Heavenly Edict Palace as a sparring partner, relieving the Divine King of Heavenly Edict's boredom. After all, in the endless life of the Divine King, he also needed to add joy to battle. From this, one could imagine just how strong Heaven Supervisor was. His usual sparring partner was the current Divine King of Heavenly Edict. Ji Xiang was at a disadvantage from the very beginning. If not for God Shura's profound foundation, it would have been very difficult for him to last until now. As for winning, there was no hope at all. However, as Divine Lord Yellow Springs entered the battle against White God, Shura's servant, Slayer, was released. Seeing that Ji Xiang was no match for God Shura, Slayer, who was known as the uncrowned ruler of the slaughter world, immediately rushed over. The two of them worked together to resist God Shura's attacks. So this is God Shura, who is said to be able to contend with the divine King of Light. How disappointing! Tao will flowed around Heaven's supervisor's body. Resplendent light formed a vast wheel of light. A terrifying wave of light in the shape of a millstone appeared in his palm, and he hurled it at Ji Xiang and Slayer. As it spun, it killed everything in its path, including the Shura guards and red-clothed elites, and all of them exploded without leaving behind a single soul. King, be careful. Slayer was the first to meet the attack. His calm face couldn't calm the great waves surging in his heart. Heaven's supervisor's cultivation was so strong that he was very close to the primordial Tao. If I was at my peak and not just a soul, I would have been able to crush him. Ji Xiang knew just how strong Heaven's supervisor was. He was indeed extraordinary, but there was still an insurmountable gap between him and the underworld war. Seeing the peerlessly domineering millstone of light spinning toward him, Ji Xiang reached out and pulled Slayer back. They couldn't rely on their own strength to take this attack head-on. At the same time, the mysterious light of the mirror bloomed in his palm. As the light grew bigger and bigger, it finally reached the height of a person and stood firmly in front of Ji Xiang. The mirror of reincarnation. The Chaos Divine artifact was born with the creation of the primordial Tao. It possessed the most ancient power of the primordial Tao, and its abilities were far more than just the Tao of reincarnation. Qin Hao didn't know much about the divine Tao, and he didn't have the ability to open many Chaos Divine artifacts. Ji Xiang was different. He was a soul of Shura, and he was a part of divinity. Shura was able to reach his current level of cultivation because all of his Tao was branded in this soul. Compared to Qin Hao, Ji Xiang knew more about how to use the Chaos Divine artifact, and he even knew how to use it in battle. Ji Xiang pressed his hands on the back of the mirror, ignoring the pleading of the old man's face that appeared on the mirror. He poured his slaughtered Tao will into it, causing the reincarnation mirror to explode with an extreme black light. The black light shot out and collided with the spinning millstone of light. There was a deafening boom in the void, and a terrifying shockwave swept out. Ji Xiang and Slayer were sent flying, and Heaven's supervisor was hit by the mirror light. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his body slid a few dozen meters away. Chaos Divine artifact. Heaven's supervisor couldn't calm down, and his divine will was fluctuating. He had intentionally mocked Ji Xiang just now to provoke Shura's soul. Of course, he knew how terrifying Shura's complete body was. It was no joke to be able to compete with the light eldest son quasi-god king. The reason he did this was to agitate Ji Xiang so that he could find a weakness in the shortest time possible so that he could kill him. However, Ji Xiang took out a Chaos Divine artifact, which undoubtedly increased the difficulty of defeating him. Reincarnation Mirror. Junimo and Tamanaji looked over at the same time. It was just as they had imagined. Shura was protecting Qin Hao because of the Chaos Divine artifact. You want to use the Reincarnation Mirror's reincarnation Great Tao to train an elite army? Junimo sneered. It seemed that Shura hadn't let go of Mingzhan's hatred and wanted to fight his way back to the light region. Ah! A blood-curdling scream pulled Junimo back to reality. He looked towards the source of the sound, and found that Fenway's soul seemed to be pulled by a strange force. It was being forcibly pulled out of his body. Fenway's face was full of pain, and he was on the verge of collapse. On the side, the Demon Master's loose robes fluttered in the wind as he extended a hand through the air, as if covering Fenway's head. A perverted sneer hung from the corner of his mouth, as he used his soul-devouring Tao to forcefully extract Fenway's soul. Tamanaji, Junimo called out. He didn't have any god lords he could use, and his Xian Qi was restricted. God Lord Tian-in, help him, Tamanaji ordered. Yes, Your Highness. God Lord Heavenly Sound slowly stepped forward, and as he walked, His body began to emit a faint ripple of sound. He waved his hand, and an incomparably gorgeous ancient zither appeared. Controlled by divine will, it seemed to play on its own. The divine laws of the great Tao formed waves that surged toward God Lord Umo, immortal grade 9 meridians. Lord Umo glanced at God Lord Tianyin's divine Tao wheel. Compared to the trash in his hand, it was indeed much stronger. Moreover, God Lord Tianyin's music contained a dignified Buddha nature that countered Lord Umo. He had no choice but to give up on extracting Fun Wei's soul and focus on God Lord Tianyin. Chapter 2203. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Let's try underestimating one more. The rhythm intertwined in the void. Countless notes jumped out and turned into swastikas. The world was covered in golden light, forming a golden ocean. Terrifying golden waves surged and crashed into the body of God Lord Umo. The demonic soul chi on his demonic body was baptized by the golden light and weakened. When the Buddhist music entered his ears and filled his demonic will, his demonic body became blurry as though it was about to dissipate. The great sun golden incantation of the southern heaven Buddha realm. Umo's expression changed slightly. He released the soul power of the great path from his palms. Thick black smoke enveloped his body, preventing the will from dissipating. In terms of attainment and divine power, Tianyin Master was inferior to him. Even with the addition of the useless Fun Wei, this should have been a one-sided battle. However, the Buddhist music incantation cultivated by his opponent happened to counter Umo's demonic soul path. The ancient divine Guqin had also received the blessing of a southern heaven great Buddha, making it even more powerful. As a result, Lord Umo felt a sense of being unable to use his strength. On the other side, Guadi and Jade Mirage Emperor were also in a fierce battle. Since he was an emperor of the divine path, and had the surname Tamanaji, it was obvious that Jade Mirage Emperor was a direct descendant of Yunza Saint King. Not only was his divine power powerful, but his attainment was also not low. There were no divine veins in his wheel of light. It was still unclear who had the upper hand between Yellow Spring and White Deity. The celestial chi was blocked by Mo Tuesday. As the elites of the 4 deity realms fought with the armies of the 2 deity kings, the area of the battle expanded. Fierce battles broke out in every corner of Azura Peak. Compared to the other divine paths, the Slaughter Path, Yellow Spring Path, Ghost Path, and Ghost Path are more extreme and different. They may have an advantage in the beginning, but as time passes and they gradually adapt, they will be overcome by their opponent. Qin Hao's eyes scanned the surroundings, and as far as his divine sense could reach, he could see every single battle. The Shura Guard's murderous nature, the indestructible Bone Path, the terror of the Ghost Path, and the strangeness of the Soul Path caused the 2 armies of divine kings who had just arrived in the ancient Nether region to suffer greatly. Because this was the first time they had encountered a Tao will that they had never encountered before, it was inevitable that they would be caught off guard and unable to exert their combat strength. However, this situation would not last for long. The troops brought by Jun Mo and Tamanaji were not ordinary Tianlun experts. They were also the elite troops of the Divine King. Huang Quan, Guadi, and Umo were unable to suppress the opponent's divine master power for the time being. It was mainly up to Shura. Shura was the core power that dominated this battlefield. Qin Hao looked up. Ji Xiang and the Slayer worked together. They borrowed the power of the great Tao of reincarnation from the mirror of reincarnation to temporarily hold back the Tian Du. However, a variable appeared at this moment. Compared to before, the evil image's divine will aura had weakened slightly, and it was starting to struggle against the upper level. They are all part of Shura's divine soul. Although they have inherited different abilities, they are not the original body. Qin Hao did not have a deep understanding of the Xiang killing path. It was only now that he knew that the evil image that had suddenly attacked him in the midst of the Red Coat elites was also a part of Shura's soul. He understood that power could not be maintained for long. No matter how powerful a divine spirit was, it could not escape the ancient law of balance. If the evil image could not defeat the upper level before its divine power weakened, it would be the one that would be defeated. The situation is beginning to show signs of unfavorable signs. The balance will gradually tilt as time passes. Once any of Shura, Huangquan, Guadi, or Umo is defeated, the disadvantage will instantly increase. Qin Hao knew that he could not just sit and wait for death. Ji Xiang had warned him not to act rashly without orders and not to say a word. But he had to do something. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before the 4 divine realms were defeated. Qin Hao tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and ignored Jia Kong and Ying Luo who were blocking him. His body floated toward the battlefield in front of him. The pitch-black wheel of the great path bloomed, and the power full of destructive aura swayed with the evil spirit. Qin Hao once again turned into an evil god of the slaughter world. As his palm slowly reached out, the blood-red spear of slaughter appeared in his hand. Qin Hao thrust the spear forward, and the world was pierced by the terrifying spear aura. Countless cries and screams swept through the air. The spear aura turned into countless glaring torrents. The evil spirits danced with it and annihilated the divine armored soldiers of the divine king army. Junimo, get out here! Qin Hao shouted loudly, and the blood spear pointed forward. His voice rolled out and roared between heaven and earth. In the battle of the infinite divine realm, Junimo entered the matrix with the sky splitter and killed the swordsman as if there was no one there, including college chief Nan. No one could withstand the power of the staff. At that time, it was to provoke Qin Hao to fight him. Today, Qin Hao was giving him a taste of his own medicine. He pointed his spear at the divine king army. Did Junimo dare to fight? Loser! Junimo looked from afar with a trace of disdain. In the palm of his hand, the divine aura of the great path slowly condensed into the shadow of a staff. He lifted the staff and was about to step out to fight. Your Highness, this man's divine power is extremely evil and cannot be compared to before. You are the son of the divine king, and your body is priceless. You cannot be tempted by him. Let me do it for you, said a divine general in dazzling divine armor beside him. Junimo stopped. His gloomy eyes stared at Qin Hao's figure. He said, Don't kill him. I want him alive. As you command. The divine general flung his cloak and stepped out. His figure instantly separated from the army. Like an extremely fast meteor, he flew across the vast battlefield. In the blink of an eye, he descended on Qin Hao's head. Bastard, why aren't you surrendering? He raised his palm and slammed it down. The palm print intertwined with divine light was like a towering mountain. It was as if a part of the sky had smashed down. Qin Hao raised his head and glanced coldly. He extended an index finger. The condensing pill finger passed down in the ancient alchemy lord clan evolved into the golden finger that could kill enemies. Evil power snaked along his arm. The evil spirits in the wheel of light that contained murderous intent howled. It was as if countless ferocious souls were injected into this finger. Immediately, an evil light flashed at the tip of his finger. An incomparably sharp ray of light shot up into the sky and pierced through everything. The mountain palm print that was pressing down collapsed, and the will of the great path disintegrated. The ray of light sank into the divine armor that protected the body of the divine general. It pierced through the divine general's divine spirit and went through his back. It flew further into the sky. No. The sorrowful cry could not stop the arrival of death. The moment the divine spirit pierced through, the armor of the Tianzhou divine general, who had been pressing down on Qin Hao's head, suddenly shattered. His body was penetrated by the countless rays of light from his body. he exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Chapter 2204. Wuling Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Things were different now. Who gave you the confidence to have 5 immortal-grade meridians? Qin Hao slowly retracted his finger, still staring at Junimo. A perfect celestial wheel with 3 meridians could crush 5 meridians of the great celestial wheel. Junimo had killed Din Nan with 1 blow. But at this time, the Tianzhou Divine General who had volunteered was stronger than Din Nan. He had 5 immortal-grade meridians and was a guard from the Tianzhou Palace. He had the potential to become a divine master, but he was still killed by Qin Hao with 1 finger. It was enough to imagine how Junimo felt. He has 3 immortal-grade meridians and is so powerful. A group of divine generals behind Junimo clenched their fists in cold sweat. It seems that he didn't just hide in the world of massacre. He also went through a lot of hard training and is qualified to see my true power. Junimo's figure slowly floated forward. He first defeated Yin Shuo of the Star Palace, then easily killed a divine general with 5 immortal-grade meridians. He used to be a lowly ant with only 1 divine pattern, but with the power of the reincarnation mirror and Azura, he had quietly grown to an extraordinary level. Vaguely, Junimo could even feel the hidden threat from Qin Hao's evil intent. Your Highness. A divine general saw Junimo move and wanted to stop him. Qin Hao's growth was too fast, and the divine power he cultivated was also very strange. His evil aura was filled with the desire to destroy, and it also contained a very strong killing intent. If something happened to Qin Hao, how would they explain it to the Tianzhou deity king? At this time, another divine general shook his head at him. Junimo had made up his mind, and no one could go against the will of the divine prince. Perhaps in his eyes, he had really regarded the survivor of the sword world as an opponent, and no one could stop him. As the divine prince, Junimo's pride did not allow him to avoid the battle, let alone be timid. Moreover, Qin Hao had always been someone he wanted to kill. Junimo could not bear to watch him grow so rapidly. He had to end him with his own hands. At this time, many divine generals and divine guards in the Heavenly Mandate Divine Domain's army had their eyes fixed on Junimo. That bastard who escaped from the sword world grew too quickly, surpassing their imaginations. They thought back to the battlefield of the Avicii Divine Domain. Qin Hao, who only had 1 divine vein, was powerless against the army of God Kings. Any of the divine generals here could have easily killed him back then. Now, the tables had turned. Qin Hao could easily kill any one of them, unless he had become a divine master, or had 6 immortal-grade meridians, or even higher. With such battle prowess, how could the palace guards of the Tianzhou Palace not be on tenterhooks? They were afraid that something would happen to Junimo. If that really happened, they must immediately rescue Junimo and work together to annihilate Qin Hao. I thought you would shrink back and not dare to face me. Qin Hao looked at Junimo's figure floating in front of him. The two of them were only a few dozen steps apart. That noble posture of the divine prince was still the same as before. Shrink back. Junimo smiled. It seems that on the day the Avicii sword world was destroyed, there was indeed a useless person hiding behind many swordsmen. It's a pity that those swordsmen who blocked for him all died. Swordsmen can die, the sword world can be destroyed, but swordsmanship will never end. When I cut off your head, you will bleed and kneel in front of my sword, repenting to the spirits of the sword world. Qin Hao dispersed the blood-colored spear in his hand. As a flash of emerald light appeared, the great void sword floated beside him. However, compared to before, the red lotus flames around the blade had completely disappeared. He had personally destroyed the divine power of the red lotus. Without the nourishment of the fire source, The great void sword was naturally no longer the same as before. However, at this moment, a layer of pitch-black divine light covered the blade. Through the halo emitted by the divine light, one could faintly see countless evil spirits attached to the blade. They were like spirits of the dead, howling and demanding Jun Mo's life. Now, regardless of the appearance or the aura of the great void sword, it had become more sinister and ferocious than before. At a glance, one could not help but feel fear. "Haha, don't tell me you think you can defeat me just because you defeated Silverlight?" Jun Mo pointed at his own nose with a playful smile on his face. To be honest, he was of the same level as Silverlight Heavenly Wheel. However, there was a world of difference between their bloodline and divine power. The blood of divine King Tianzhao flowed in his body. The divine king's will of Tao filled his entire body. This was Jun Mo's unparalleled potential, endless potential. The divine king was an innate divine spirit created by chaos. His will of Tao was filled with the most primitive Hongmeng Great Tao. Jun Mo was the same. The will of Tao he possessed was the divine king's will of Tao. Silverlight? He was just a postnatal perfect living being. When it came to his potential, he was not even fit to carry Jun Mo's shoes. Your growth has indeed surprised me. This is all due to the magical effect of the reincarnation mirror. Even if you have 3 bloodlines and have the same 30,000 cultivation as me, how can the 30,000 years of cultivation that you hastily forged in 100 years be compared to my refined cultivation? Jun Mo stretched out his sky splitter and pointed at Qin Hao's face from afar. He said majestically, "The strength of the Divine Prince's divine power is far beyond your imagination. I don't mind telling you kindly that the strength I used to destroy the infinite divine world was not even half of my full strength. In my eyes, you are the same type as Silverlight. Both of you are trash." Bang! The evil light reflected in his eyes. The incomparably fast figure stepped out with the heaven ascending step. When Jun Mo finished his last word, Qin Hao was already in front of him. The emerald sword light mixed with black color slashed out. The strong killing power seemed to freeze Jun Mo's body. When Jun Mo's face changed drastically, he barely dodged the sword. However, he was punched in the face by Qin Hao. His nose bled and he rolled out in a sorry state. "Sword!" Qin Hao raised his divine sword to the sky. A rhythmic sound rang out in the void. It seemed that countless divine swords were released. Then, one after another, densely packed together appeared. They were like black fish scales, flashing with a dark luster. He pointed his sword and the divine swords in the sky flew towards Jun Mo. The pitch-black sword light accurately pierced into the place where Jun Mo fell. There, the mountains collapsed and the earth split open. Terrifying black lava spewed out. The unceasing falling sword chi formed a terrifying storm of destruction. With every sword that entered, the storm grew larger and larger. It was filled with an aura of destruction. "Your Highness!" The divine generals of Tianzhao in the army shouted in unison. Their voices made people's hearts clench. At the same time, Tamanaji narrowed his eyes. His pupils emitted a fierce luster as he looked at the place where Jun Mo fell. There, the endless storm of sword chi raged as if it could destroy the heavens. Jun Mo's confidence and pride had taught him a lesson in blood. His shouts also affected the hearts of many great gods and affected the entire battlefield. Shangji Tiandu, Bai Shen, and even Jade Virtual Emperor all looked over in the midst of the battle. However, this action attracted the counterattacks of Azura, Huang Quan, Gui Di, and Umo. Compared to these great gods, Qin Hao's cultivation was indeed insignificant. However, in his own way, he could affect and even change the situation of the battle. In the past, when he faced the honorable Prince of God, he was indeed powerless. That powerlessness surpassed the feeling of guilt. But today he, who was once powerless, was qualified to stand in front of the Prince of God. He took the initiative to attack. When Jun Mo could not defend himself, He gave him a painful blow. Chapter 2205. The sword chi spiraled, and the sound of swords whistling through the air did not stop for a long time. The destructive light of slaughter engulfed the earth, and the crisscrossing ravines in the surroundings were affected, causing the area to expand. If not for the fact that one could still feel Jun Mo's aura in the storm of sword light, one would even think that he had been killed by Qin Hao in one move. This kid stole the mirror of samsara and increased his cultivation. He also cultivated the great Tao of slaughter with the help of the Azura god, and cultivated the divine power of slaughter. I really don't know where his evil aura came from, and where did the divine power he was good at go. An older Cloud Pool divine guard stood beside Yuliuji and suppressed Yuliuji with just one move. Among the top geniuses of the untainted land, this was something to be proud of. The sword cultivator who had escaped from the sword world was too shocking. Jun Mo has created a strong enemy for himself. This time, he will probably take out the true strength of the Divine Prince and take him seriously. Let's just enjoy it quietly. Tamanaji looked over and revealed a cold and sinister smile. Qin Hao did indeed have the qualifications to challenge the successor of the Divine King. His strength was rare even among the many perfect geniuses. Let's see how much trouble he can cause Jun Mo. If their positions were switched, Tamanaji did not dare to say that he could completely suppress Qin Hao. If he wanted to win, he would have to pay a price. Your Highness, what are you thinking? The Cloud Pool Divine Guard noticed that Tamanaji seemed to have changed. I'm thinking, how badly will Jun Mo be injured in this battle? Is it possible that the only son of the Divine King of Tianzhou will die here? Tamanaji's eyes became gloomier and gloomier. He hoped that Qin Hao's performance would not be too disappointing. The Cloud Pool Divine Guard's heart suddenly tightened as he looked at his young master in disbelief. He could faintly smell an unusual aura. The viciousness hidden in Tamanaji's eyes made his Divine Guard feel afraid. 1. The black sword current of the Great Path slowly dissipated. A terrifying sword pit that was as deep as the core of the earth was exposed on the scorched earth of the Slaughter Divine Realm. It was like a huge scar that could not be erased. In the center of the sword pit, Jun Mo held the sky-splitting rod and covered his eyes with one hand. As the raging sword chi around him disappeared, he slowly moved his hand away and flicked the dust off his tattered clothes. Qin Hao watched everything from afar. After this attack, Jun Mo wasn't injured at all. Only his luxurious prince's clothes were torn in countless places. Just like what Jun Mo had said, when he destroyed the sword world, he had used less than half of his full strength. Back then, Qin Hao had been able to injure him with only one god vein. In fact, it was mostly due to luck. Jun Mo had not taken it seriously. But now, the noble Divine Prince had gradually revealed the power of the Divine King's bloodline. Even if Qin Hao had developed 3 god veins, it would be even more difficult to shake him. Are you afraid? Jun Mo smiled as he walked in the void, holding his rod as he walked toward Qin Hao. With 30,000 years of perfect cultivation, Qin Hao had the same capital as Yin Shua. However, Yin Shua had never had the chance to see the Divine Prince's true power. As expected. After all, that sword strike just now was just a casual move of mine. Qin Hao's emotions were not affected. He did not lie. That sword strike was purely filled with slaughter sword will and mixed with evil power, thus creating a terrifying storm of destruction. It was not a great path divine skill. He still had many divine skills that he had not used yet. What a strange guy. Thinking back on everything, I'm afraid that in the past, I could not have predicted that one day you would grow to this level. However, even if I had predicted it, I would still not hesitate to do it all over again. I would extract your soul and dig out your bones, banish you and Zhan Wu from the Archean realm, destroy the infinite divine realm, and chase you to the slaughter world. Because all of this was completely within my control. No matter how powerful you are, you will not be able to escape from my grasp. If I want you dead, not even the Divine King can stop me." Above Jun Mo's body, a noble and dazzling perfect celestial wheel appeared. Rolling divine power flowed from his palm into the sky splitter rod. At this moment, an independent universe seemed to have appeared where he was. He carried the power of the universe on his back. The sky splitter rod suddenly swung out, and the divine light of the great path extended. From a great distance it smashed toward Qin Hao. Within the light of the rod, the void collapsed. Buzz. Qin Hao's great void sword was especially powerful. He pointed the sword above his head, and his whole body turned into a world of swords. Countless sword chi shot toward the sky. It was as if evil spirits were soaring into the sky and converging into a sword that could open the sky. Boom! The might of the rod that could destroy the void fell. This chaotic divine implement that was born in the same time and space as the divine kings contained unimaginable power. The light of the rod crushed everything. The shadow of the sword that could open the sky cracked inch by inch until it was completely crushed by the light of the rod. Then, the rod fell with a rumble and hit the place where Qin Hao was standing. Divine light flowed on Qin Hao's body. His feet moved in an ancient and mysterious way. He actually escaped from the gap between the might of the rod and was not affected by the chaotic divine implement. In the next moment, Qin Hao, who had disappeared, appeared in front of Jun Mo. Just like before, he casually slashed out with his sword. The sword light stirred up evil spirits that filled the sky. Many deformed human heads dragged long strands of evil aura. In the blink of an eye, they pounced and bit on Jun Mo's noble sky wheel. The most evil evil, the most evil evil, the thousands of resentful spirits and evil thoughts in the divine palace gathered the power of all laws. However, they were unable to devour the light wheel of the divine king's descendant. Many of the evil spirits were even killed by the aura of the divine king emitted by Jun Mo as soon as they got close. The most evil power that Yin Shua could not avoid was ineffective against Jun Mo. Perfect sky wheels are different after all. As expected of the will of the divine king. Qin Hao gritted his teeth fiercely. The evil power was unique, and almost ignored all rules and laws. Although Yin Shua's sky wheel was perfect and was one with the great Tao, he was still a postnatal creature. However, the bloodline of the divine king was innate and contained the power of the primordial great Tao. In terms of quality, the two were completely different. As for the evil power, it belonged to the former. It was also a postnatal perfect power. It looks scary, but it's just for show. Jun Mo swung his staff again. Even the sky was about to fall under the might of his staff. Ordinary divine path, heavenly wheels could not avoid it at all. However, when he saw Qin Hao escape from the staff's shadow effortlessly, Jun Mo also gritted his teeth fiercely. The divine steps heaven-stomping technique of the paragon of alchemy was truly disgusting. Prison circle seal. A divine king's imprint appeared on his palm. The imprint emanated of vast and sacred power. Jun Mo struck his palm at the sky. Boundless radiance gushed out and radiated in all directions along the great Tao. In the haze, streaks of scattered light seemed to form a net, sealing and imprisoning the space where Qin Hao and Jun Mo were. Back then, Jun Mo had suffered a lot from the divine step. The prison circle was a move he learned from divine King Tian Zhao. The divine king created it, and the great Tao was unbreakable. It truly became the counter to the divine steps heaven-stomping technique of the paragon of alchemy. The will of the great Tao of space is completely restrained by Jun Mo's divine will. Qin Hao once again felt the feeling of the floating glass field. He knew that the divine steps would not be effective. However, he did not panic. After all, their cultivation was on par. Even if he took the staff attack head-on, there was no reason for him to lose. Let's see how you run. Die. Jun Mo swung the sky splitter above his head, creating a sky full of staff shadows. The sky full of staff shadows merged into one. It was as if the might of the heavens came crashing down. With a boom, it struck Qin Hao's eyes. Chapter 2206 114 Chinese Network Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. No more wisdom, so fast, so vigorous. Qin Hao could no longer dodge under the restrictive spell of the painted ground prison. At this moment, the roar of the great path sword waterfall sounded in his body. The Taishu divine sword in his hand slashed out, and the evil light of the sky wheel suddenly surged. The infinite sword will in his body pushed out wave after wave, like layers of giant waves, all of it merged into this sword. Boom! Rip! His clothes were torn, and there was the sound of flesh being cut open. Qin Hao only felt that the bones in his hand that held the sword were shattered. His arm went soft, and he fell from the sky, unable to stop. The divine consciousness in his mind was in a mess, and the bones in his body were making crazy noises. However, Jun Mo was also frantically flying backward. In front of him, the sword Qi was like a river of swords that was wreaking havoc. The sharp light actually penetrated his wheel of light and cut into his skin. His hand that was holding the staff was covered with small wounds, and there was a bloody mark on his chest. Good sword technique, Tamanaji praised. Fortunately, Divine Prince Jun Mo's wheel light is strong. Otherwise, this sword would be enough to cut him into pieces. The slightly older Yunzhi Divine Guard said. These two people's divine power was ridiculously strong. Not to mention 5 immortal meridians, even 6 immortal meridians would not be able to withstand their explosive power. As for the ordinary Great Sky Wheel and Small Sky Wheel, they were no different from ants in front of the perfect bloodline, unless they had cultivated for more than 100,000 years. 100,000 years of divine path was a watershed. This Yunzhi Divine Guard had heard from the Sage King that after 100,000 years of cultivation, the sky wheel would change qualitatively, and the divine meridians would disappear. For example, Shangji Tiandu, Bai Shen, and even Azura God, Divine Lord of the Netherworld, Guadi, and Umo. These great gods all possessed 100,000 years of cultivation in the divine Tao, and some of their cultivation had even surpassed that. Jun Mo could not help but cry out in pain. His sharp eyes looked at the small wound on his hand. His noble divine prince body and divine king bloodline had thick liquid flowing out of the wound. The feeling of the itch slowly penetrated, and for a moment, he felt as if his body, as if it was paralyzed. All of this was related to the sword wound caused by Qin Hao. What exactly is his evil force? Letting out a muffled groan, Jun Mo urged the sky wheel to force the pus out of the wound. At this moment, he saw a pale white smoke floating out of the pus. The smoke seemed to condense into all kinds of strange faces, and they were howling at Jun Mo Buzz. Translation Qin Hao felt as if he was carrying countless mountains on his back as he was smashed into the ground by the staff. The scorched earth was shaken into a huge crater. He quickly crawled up, but before he could stand firm, he felt his limbs and bones shattering. The God King bloodline is truly terrifying. Taking a deep breath, the serene tranquil water soul filtered the body and began to repair the damaged godly bones. Qin Hao raised his head and looked at Jun Mo. It was as if their minds were connected. Neither of them immediately attacked. They maintained their silence and observed each other seriously. Jun Mo's Tao will is unable to penetrate it, but it seems that the evil force has not completely lost its influence. Qin Hao could sense the change in Jun Mo's aura. Within that aura, there was a faint remnant of his evil qi, which proved that Jun Mo had been corroded by evil qi and was immediately eliminated. Comparing the post-celestial Tao will to the primordial Tao will, the post-celestial Tao will is indeed not as powerful as the primordial Tao will. However, the evil qi that is condensed from all Tao will seems to be able to gradually mutate according to the opponent's strength. Qin Hao noticed that the evil qi was unable to penetrate Jun Mo's heavenly wheel bloodline at the beginning of the battle. It was unable to devour the opponent's Tao will and turn it into its own Tao like before. However, this inability to devour was only temporary. It seemed that the evil qi was able to evolve based on Jun Mo's Tao will and turn it into a Tao that was similar to or close to the opponent's Tao before assimilating it. This discovery caused Qin Hao to be unable to help but become excited. The post-celestial Tao will was not necessarily destined to be weak, just like how experts grew step by step from being weak. Wasn't there someone who was as strong as a god king slowly cultivated? Once Qin Hao's evil qi was able to ignore Jun Mo's Tao will, the outcome of the battle would basically be a foregone conclusion. Bang! A figure flew down from the sky. The Azura evil spirit roared angrily and forcefully stabilized its body. Then, a heavenly Tao diagram that contained a primordial light came crashing down, once again striking the evil spirit's body. Blood seeped from the corner of the evil spirit's mouth as it was pushed down a little more. Azura, you're only a soul avatar. You're definitely not my match. Do you still want to continue? The upper extremity's imposing figure radiated with boundless light as it slowly descended. It stood above the evil spirit's head and coldly looked down on it. After the repeated clashes, the evil spirit's divine power was rapidly depleted. After all, it was not the main body, but a soul avatar that had been separated from the main body. Its divine origin was still in the Azura's true body. Creak! The evil spirit clenched its fists and angrily glared at the upper extremity divine lord. It felt extremely unjust. In truth, the rapid depletion of its divine power was only one of the reasons. Any aspect Tao that was separated from the aspect of killing would consume its divine power very quickly in battle. However, the most important reason was that the main body was not complete in the first place. Thus, the 90% combat power that the evil spirit inherited was not complete either. Otherwise, it would not have been suppressed by the upper extremity so quickly. The evil spirit sensed that the upper extremity's strength was about the same as the main body's 90%. If it was at its peak state back then, the evil spirit would have been able to completely suppress the upper extremity, and they would not be able to determine the victor. Sadly, the Azura still could not find the last of his soul avatar. The evil spirit's gaze silently swept in a direction. The evil spirit saw that the Ji Xiang and the Slayer were working together over there. They were using the mirror of reincarnation to fight the Tiandu, but they were still struggling. The Ji Xiang was in the same situation as the evil spirit. As its divine power depleted too quickly, it would not be able to stop the Tiandu sooner or later. Once that happened, the evil spirit and the Ji Xiang would both be defeated, and the entire battlefield would instantly fall into hell. Now that things have come to this, there's only one way. The evil spirit took a deep breath and sent a telepathic message to the Ji Xiang. His words quietly reverberated in the Ji Xiang's mind. The Ji Xiang pressed his hand on the mirror of reincarnation and released an incomparably turbulent reincarnation field. It continuously reincarnated the Tiandu's attack. When it heard the evil spirit's voice, its body trembled slightly. Having inherited 90% of the Azura's divinity, the Ji Xiang naturally understood the evil spirit's meaning. If it wanted to reverse the situation and break out of the current predicament, there was only one way that could work, and that was to soul fusion. You should know that I have 90% of the original body's combat power, and you have less than 40%. Only by letting your power return to me will there be a slight possibility of suppressing the upper extremity. The evil spirit continued to send a telepathic message. Every soul specialized in different abilities, but in the current situation, the evil spirit was undoubtedly more useful. This meant that once the two of them fused, the evil spirit would have to be the main one, and the Ji Xiang would disappear. Every soul of the path of killing had an independent life. After the battle of the underworld, the Ji Xiang had only been separated from the original body for a long time. He had not even taken a second look at this world. Now, was it going to vanish into thin air? I understand. The Ji Xiang looked at the evil spirit from afar. It dispersed the divine power of massacre in its palm and threw the mirror of reincarnation to the slayer. Then, it took a step forward. It was like an ethereal shadow walking through the void. It walked to the evil spirit's position and overlapped with its figure. King. The slayer turned his head and saw this scene. His heart ached and he felt extremely uncomfortable. Chapter 2207. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation comparing 90% power and 90% divinity. From the perspective of the Slayer, Evil Face was more appropriate for the current Azura God Master, while Ji Face was more appropriate for the Azura Prince before the underworld was destroyed. Azura Prince was gentle and wise, and there was kindness hidden in the depths of his heart. The Slayer cherished the memory of the former Azura Prince. As the prince's attendant, he was naturally closer to Ji Face. That was the Azura in the Slayer's heart, not the cruel Azura god filled with blood and killing intent after the underworld was destroyed. Watching Ji Face leave bit by bit, the Slayer felt as though he saw the former Azura Prince gradually fade away, and there was a kind of sadness in his heart. Ji Face wouldn't disappear forever after fusing with Evil Face's killing path. His temporary departure would only allow his godly power to concentrate on Evil Face and complete his godly path. However, the Slayer still felt very sad as he watched Azura change. If possible, he wished that Azura would always be that gentle and wise Azura Prince. The king's original body can't leave the Iron Throne of Pluto. Merging Ji Face with Evil Face is the best way to deal with the situation. The killing light in his palm kept pouring into the reincarnation mirror. The Slayer glanced at Azura Feng's palace. Releasing Azura's original body would cause a terrible disaster to the killing world. Maybe his original body could beat back Upper Extreme and Tiandu, but at the same time, he would kill everyone here. At that time, not to mention protecting Qin Hao and Muri, even his brothers Yellow Spring, Gue Di, and Umo wouldn't be able to escape. A berserk Azura would destroy everything in his eyes, and it would be difficult to stop the killing. You should worry about your own situation first. A cold voice floated into his ears. In front of him, the great being from the primeval realm, Tiandu, was shining with divine light. His majestic godly path wheel shook the sky, and his eyes were fixed on the Slayer. He raised his fist and heavily punched with terrifying great path laws. Ji Face's departure strengthened Evil Face, but it was also beneficial to Tiandu's battle. Only the Slayer was left because without Ji Face, Tiandu had a complete advantage in strength. The Slayer shouted, and the killing power in his palm exploded. A vast reincarnation field formed above the reincarnation mirror, and suddenly, the light reflected Tiandu's fist. In that instant, the heavens shattered, cracks appearing everywhere. Then, Slayer spat out a mouthful of blood and used both hands to block the reincarnation mirror. He was sent flying by Tiandu's fist. The Slayer's cultivation was not shallow, but the difference in divine power caused the balance to tilt. He was still quite a distance away from the divine realm of the upper extremity and Tiandu at best. He was a mid-level god. He had no hope of winning this battle. However, as he was sent flying, a look of determination flashed across the Slayer's face. No matter what, he had to delay the Heaven Overseer and create an opportunity for the Yi Xiang to defeat the upper extremity. Perhaps, the moment the dust of this battle settled, the servants who watched over the god realm for the Azura Prince would no longer be able to serve him. Boom! The two figures overlapped in the void. The light of wisdom melted into the boundless darkness emanating from the evil figure, perfecting the killing path of the evil figure. At that moment, the evil face's body changed. Its aura became colder and deeper. The wheel of light that surrounded its body was like a world of darkness. That deep world was filled with destruction. However, the moment their eyes met, Upper Extreme saw that there was something else in the evil face's eyes. It was more lively, as if it was divinity. Now, let me reacquaint myself with you. The evil figure carried the power of destruction, but its eyes were extremely clear. It walked step by step toward Upper Extreme. Its calmness was like that of a madman who wanted to destroy the world, but still maintained its wisdom and calmness. The fusion of wisdom did not increase the upper limit of the evil figure's strength. In fact, its strength did not increase by much. However, the return of divinity made the will of Tao it released more complete. It also made it easier to control the Tao. All of this did not seem to change its strength, but it caused a qualitative change in its combat power. Azura, Upper Extreme murmured. As the evil figure approached, the aura of death in the air became thicker. That pressure made even Upper Extreme, who had comprehended the desolation will, feel his heart tremble slightly. Having cultivated to this level, Upper Extreme clearly knew what had happened to the evil figure. Perhaps the evil figure now was worthy of being called the Azura god. No, it was far from enough. What was walking toward him was still the Azura's Tao will soul form, not the Azura at his peak. Creak. Upper Extreme clenched his fists because of nervousness. Beads of cold sweat slid down his forehead. Feeling the pressure of the evil figure's aura, it was hard to imagine how powerful the complete Azura during the Underworld War would be. Boom! The desolation will flowed and merged into the divine diagram of the heavenly path. The majestic might of the great path pressed down with Upper Extreme's palm, covering the evil figure's head as it approached. The Yi Xiang looked up, and there was a hint of disdain in its eyes. It allowed the divine picture of the heavenly ways to come down on it. Just as the desolation will was about to hit its body, a huge shadow of an ancient god appeared behind the Yi Xiang. It punched out, shattering the divine picture of the heavenly ways into light bubbles that filled the air. The desolation will that had gathered within was immediately disintegrated. Azura Hell. The evil figure raised its arm and pointed a finger forward. A terrifying black torrent burst from the tip of its finger. The will of the great path dyed the heavens into a world of darkness. Suddenly, a dense crowd of figures appeared in the space. They wore tattered robes and held the scimitars of the Grim Reaper. They charged forward like an army of millions. Their extreme killing intent ignited a frenzy, and they flooded the area where Upper Extreme was. This is the will of the Divine King. No, it's not. How could he use such power? Upper Extreme was facing an endless army of Grim Reapers. The Divine King created things with a single thought, bestowing the will of all things and opening up the heavens. This was the Divine King's innate primordial great path. Azura was not yet the Divine King. How could he use such terrifying power? Although it was not the true will of the Divine King, it was enough to make Upper Extreme feel uncontrollable fear. Within the Divine King's law, the living beings in the worlds he created could be given strength according to his will. In other words, the evil figure was the creator. Wherever his will of Tao reached, he could create anything he wanted. At least, Upper Extreme's predicament was being surrounded by the endless army of divine masters. Lacking the divine power of earth, I did not cultivate to the level of Nether King. But that did not stop me from creating the universe, because I once stood on the verge of becoming a divine king. The evil figure watched quietly as Upper Extreme struggled in the army of divine masters. He could fight with the divine Son of Light, a quasi-divine king. Naturally, he himself was also a quasi-divine king. The lack of earth stopped Azura in his tracks. The eldest Son of Light reached the primordial great path first, and that was why he was able to break Azura's spirit apart. Otherwise, Azura would not have lost. Chapter 2208 114 Chinese Network Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Reverse the situation. The boundless darkness seemed like it would never fade away. The slaughter Tao intent formed more and more shadows of the death god. The will of the Azura had bestowed upon them the power of a divine master. The upper limit was trapped in a boundless black ocean. This was a purgatory of endless slaughter. Dazzling divine power pierced through everything. The divine diagram of the heavenly Tao that flowed with desolate will wrapped around Shangji's body. Shangji roared and fought like an undefeatable war god. He stood in the center of the darkness, allowing the darkness to corrode his defenses. Shangji's tireless punches made him feel numb. He didn't even know how many dead souls he had destroyed. However, as time passed, no matter how valiant Shangji was, the radiance of the divine diagram of the heavenly Tao gradually dimmed. His aura was no longer the same as before, until one of the thousands of shadows of the Grim Reaper slashed a wound on his body. The cold, pitch-black blade tore through Shangji's robes and drew out a bright red line of blood. Be destroyed. Shangji placed his palms on top of his head. An ancient and complex great Tao insignia appeared beneath his feet. The desolate divine will that surrounded Shangji's body condensed into a dazzling divine figure. He was like a divine king who looked down on the world. His blurry facial features gradually turned into the majestic face of the divine King Tianzhao. Be destroyed. A terrifying storm of Tao intent erupted from his palms. The storm swept out and flattened the heavens. Shangji, who was trapped in the Azura purgatory, finally felt that he couldn't hold on any longer. He had no choice but to use the power of faith and borrow the power of the divine King Tianzhao in the primeval realm to break through the Azura purgatory. Boom! A vast and boundless storm of light tore through everything, completely wiping out the darkness. The high-level divine master panted heavily, his eyes hazy with sweat and his chest heaving up and down. He silently watched the Azura evil face that the high-level divine master was performing. It was too terrifying. This was the power of a divine king. It was different from the past. The birth of any divine world was under the influence of a divine master's Tao intent. After a long time, it slowly formed the heavenly Tao. But the Azura could create things with a single thought. Even though what was created was merely a puppet body formed from Tao will and not a real life, it still made Shangji's heart palpitate. If he continued to be trapped in the Azura purgatory, he would be exhausted sooner or later. Even his celestial origin would be exhausted. To be able to reach this step and comprehend the desolation will, I thought you had broken free from the shackles of the Divine King. I did not expect you to still be a believer of the Divine King. Evil shook his head at upper extremity. Breaking the Azura purgatory with the power of faith from the King of Gods, how many blessings can you receive from the heavenly edict? With that, the evil face pointed at the upper pole. In an instant, the purgatory reappeared, and the darkness engulfed the upper pole like a tide. The figures holding the scimitars of the Grim Reaper lined up densely, and they let out earth-shattering screams as they swung their scimitars. No. The upper pole was engulfed by the darkness once again, and his deafening screams could not hide the helplessness in them. Qin Hao heard the sound coming from above his head and subconsciously looked up. The wisdom face and the evil face had merged and perfected the evil face's Tao of killing. The evil face was now able to use some of the abhijna and forbidden arts of the Azura. Looking at the situation, the upper pole was being suppressed, which was a good thing. However, when Qin Hao looked at the other battle, he could not help but break out in cold sweat. Without the wisdom face, the Slayer was fighting against the Inspector of Heaven alone. Even with the help of the Mirror of Reincarnation, the Supreme of the Slaughtering World spat out a mouthful of blood every time they clashed. The aura of the divine will that he exuded was getting weaker and weaker, almost to the point of being unstable. The evil face is suppressing the upper pole, but the Slayer is no match for the Inspector of Heaven. Qin Hao was not sure how long the upper pole could last in the endless Azura purgatory, but he could see that the Slayer's next move could kill the Inspector of Heaven. This was still a dangerous battle, and they had to end it as soon as possible. Looking back at Junimo, Qin Hao moved his mind and surging sword chi surged around him. He took the lead and flew toward the Slayer. Countless sword chi flew with him. Suddenly, thousands of swords chimed together, and the sound of the swords was loud and clear, forming the sound of great Tao resonating. From afar, Qin Hao looked like he was wrapped in an ancient sword pagoda. Countless sword lights, with the great void sword in his hand as the core, burst out with dazzling divine light and pierced toward Junimo. Junimo looked on coldly. He stepped on the void and the sky-splitting cudgel in his hand smashed down. The wheel light was injected into it, and the extended shadow of the cudgel was like a terrifying heavenly pillar. With a deep rumble, the cudgel brushed past Qin Hao's body and crashed into the ground. The scorched earth within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was reduced into a terrifying pit under the cudgel. Bang! 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 The extremely heavy rumbling sounds were incessant. The sky-splitting cudgel in Junimo's hand struck out hundreds of times at an unbelievable speed. Every time, the cudgel brushed past Qin Hao. Under the restrictive spell of prison, Qin Hao still managed to dodge the cudgel repeatedly and was unable to hit him accurately. Damn it! Junimo couldn't help cursing angrily. Enjoying the smoothness of silk, was he born in the year of the loach? Facing the cudgel's continuous attacks, Qin Hao was getting closer and closer to Junimo. The momentum of the sword pagoda wrapped around his body was frightening. Although his fleet footsteps couldn't unleash the magical effect it should have under Junimo's restrictive spell, he himself was extremely good at speed and movement technique. They were painstakingly honed from countless fierce battles and were engraved in his bones and soul. I really miss the space Tao insight. As Qin Hao flew, he kept closing the distance between him and Junimo. His eyes were fixed on the godly source in Junimo's chest. The sword in his hand that was imbued with a murderous aura seemed exceptionally fierce. If he wasn't affected by the restrictive spell of prison, he could use the fleet footsteps and instantly get close to Junimo. He wouldn't have to work so hard. Even if the fleet footsteps were restricted, if his sky wheel was still filled with space divine power, it would still be greatly beneficial. What a pity! After this battle, he must restore space divine power and Red Lotus tyrannical fire. Chapter 2209 114 Chinese Network Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation 14 kills. Junimo's expression turned serious. The momentum formed by the 10,000 swords brought him a sense of nervousness that he had never felt before. Junimo knew that it was a sense of threat. They watched as Qin Hao's aura grew stronger and stronger. His flying figure shrouded the outline of a green sword pagoda, which became more and more substantial. After Junimo's 100-rod strike missed, he began to accumulate power. He gripped the sky splitter tightly with both hands. The muscles on his arms tightened and blood vessels appeared. The noble bloodline of the divine king roared. Junimo raised the chaotic divine weapon above his head. A layer of terrifying divine light wrapped around the staff like a vortex. Tao-crushing strike. He shouted. The noble divine prince had never been like this. The opponents he had met before were easily wiped out before they even had the chance to witness his true power. But now, he felt an uncontrollable counterattack from Qin Hao. Just as the huge green sword pagoda broke through the void and descended, Lord Mo Gao Yang's sky-splitting rod heavily swung down. The colorful whirlpool fiercely attacked the sword pagoda. Following a terrifying explosion, the whirlpool exploded. Lord Mo Gaoyang seemed to be unable to resist the impact, and his body was sent flying. Then, he swung the staff again. Bang! The great Tao was destroyed, and the bloodline of the Divine King unleashed a destructive storm that could collapse the heavens and earth. When the second staff strike landed, the one who was knocked back was Qin Hao. The momentum of the green sword pagoda faltered, and dense cracks appeared on it. Kneel! Jun Mo raised the sky splitter and struck out again. The force of the staff was even more violent and turbulent. It was as if the heavens were being crushed by the shadow of his staff. Immediately, a terrifying divine light vibrated, and the sword pagodas were finally destroyed. They were densely packed and turned into light spots in the void. However, Qin Hao's figure in the tower did not stop. He suppressed the surging blood in his throat and shot out a sharp long rainbow from the great void sword in his hand, directly piercing towards Jun Mo's celestial source. Kneel! Jun Mo shouted at the top of his lungs. His facial features became extremely ferocious. The sharp sword light pierced through. He swung the staff for the fourth time. This time, the staff did not stop Qin Hao's attack. He hit Qin Hao's body directly. Bang! Crack! Ah! Jun Mo's pained screams spread throughout the void battleground. This was the third time in history that he had been injured by Qin Hao. His injury was more terrifying than any other time. His perfect wheel of translation was cut open. Sword Qi entered his body and tore his divine body apart. The power of the way of the sword directly invaded his divine source, threatening his life. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. Although the Divine Prince could still endure these injuries, the evil in the sword will had attached itself to his divine source. He felt as if many worms had entered his body. His consciousness could even see many deformed and terrifying faces appearing in his divine source. Jun Mo is injured. Tamanaji clenched his fists. His eyes shone with excitement. His injury was not light. Divine Prince Jun Mo underestimated his opponent. Although the bloodline of the Divine King can ignore any world power and way of the heavens suppression, this was the ancient nether domain. His opponent has an advantage, the older Yun Zhe Divine Guard beside him said. Qin Hao had first entered the sword world to cultivate the way of the sword. Then, he entered the slaughter world to cultivate the way of the slaughter. Here, he had the advantage of way of the heavens. Neither of them was bound by way of the heavens. Jun Mo could ignore it, but his opponent had been strengthened by the power of the world. It was obvious which side had the advantage. Your Highness, in the army of the Tianzhou Divine Realm, many of the Tianzhou Divine Generals saw that Jun Mo was injured. Moreover, his divine source was injured. They could not help but feel their hearts in their throat. No one is allowed to come over. I will kill him with my own hand. Jun Mo clenched his teeth and sucked in a cold breath. Dazzling light gradually enveloped his body. The Divine King armor protected his injured divine source. He looked at the falling Qin Hao. Then, he grabbed the sky-splitting staff and swooped down. Then, he swung out another attack. The staff light from the chaotic divine weapon pressed down on Qin Hao's head from afar. Jun Mo's divine source was injured, but so was Qin Hao. Half of his divine bones were almost shattered. The Azura evil face, Nether, Gui Di, and Yumo Master naturally felt it. However, they could not help him. After all, their opponent was not a simple person. Sword! The wind whistled past Qin Hao's ears. As he fell, the great void sword in his hand vibrated rhythmically. Dense shadows of divine swords appeared around him again. He grabbed with his left hand and the blood-red spear appeared. He threw it at the charging Jun Mo. Jun Mo held the chaotic divine weapon sky-splitting staff. Its power was extremely strong. Qin Hao had two divine weapons in his hand. He would not care about fairness. This battle was not fair to begin with. Whoosh! The blood-red spear pierced through. It emitted an extremely strong bloody aura. It was like a gust of wind that poured into Jun Mo's throat. He could not help but vomit. He did not have time to attack Qin Hao. Instead, he attacked the spear. Clang! The sound of the great Tao reverberated. A layer of dark red blood mist seeped out of the spear. It was as if the spear was injured. It was hit by Jun Mo's sky-splitting staff. When the blood-red color spread out and covered his field of vision, Lord Mo actually lost sight of Qin Hao. He could only rely on his divine sense to lock onto Qin Hao's aura. He stared fiercely at a certain direction in the blood-red fog and stabbed his staff in that direction, stirring up divine particles that filled the sky and dispelling the blood-red color that covered the world. Jun Mo's strength is indeed strong. I did not believe it before, but now I do. Even if he has the same level of heavenly wheel and the same level of cultivation, the perfect demon of the untainted land is no match for the bloodline of the divine king. Qin Hao's falling body had already stopped. He held the sword in one hand and the spear in the other. He closed his eyes and floated in midair. The bloodline of the divine king was superior to ordinary perfect heavenly wheels. If Qin Hao could defeat the divine prince with his previous foolish thoughts, he would definitely die in this battle. However, something strange happened. No laws could corrode the bloodline of the divine king, but it gradually weakened under the influence of the evil power. Perhaps Jun Mo did not even think of it. Even Qin Hao did not think of it. However, it really happened. Unknowingly, in the battle, Jun Mo frequently came into contact with the evil power. His divine intent had already weakened by 20%. Perhaps in Jun Mo's opinion, it was because his battle with Qin Hao was too intense and his divine power was depleted. However, Qin Hao deeply understood that this originated from the corrosion of the evil power. Jun Mo had been attacked by the evil power more than once and had it enter his body. Blood flowed from the spear and the sword. Qin Hao held the sword on the other side, but the sound of the sword was rhythmic. He had the power of two realms of the divine Tao. At this moment, he closed his eyes and felt very mysterious. It was as if he was ruling over two worlds. On his left was a blood-red ocean of slaughter, and on his right was all the sword intent in the world. Go to hell! Jun Mo's shout came through the blood fog. The terrifying rod light stirred up the turbulent law particles and chopped in front of him. Qin Hao's closed eyes opened at this moment. His deep pupils released an intense divine radiance. One of his eyes was golden, and the other was completely blood-red. At this moment, the sword and spear left his hand at the same time. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sword and spear flew side by side like two rainbows. Along the way, they split into many shadows. After counting carefully, the number of shadows of the spear and sword was exactly the same. There were 7 of them. Chapter 22:10. The legendary sword sovereign's famous technique, 1 sword 7 kills. 1 sword strike, 7 killing intense, real and fake. All could be real and all could be fake. Or perhaps it should be called 14 sword spear kills. The terrifying blood-colored torrent rushed forward like a surging river of blood. The 7 spear images were like 7 crazy lunatics. The whistling sound of the spear swept up the miserable howls of countless undead. The look in Jun Mo's eyes suddenly changed, and a trace of shock appeared on his fierce face. He looked at the 7 sword shadows that were also flying towards him, and shock was filled with a wisp of fear, and his face turned pale. Be it the spear or the sword, at this moment, he couldn't tell which one was real. Jun Mo smelled the scent of death. His spirit was firmly locked onto by Qin Hao's spear intent and sword intent. In the next second, he turned around and fled, madly running in the direction of the Tianzhao God Realm's army. What a disgrace! He was the divine prince, and the innate deity king's bloodline flowed in his veins. In the chaos, the perfect Tianluan stood at the top of the pyramid. But even among all the perfect Tianluan, he, who was almost invincible, was running away. Because he couldn't withstand Qin Hao's attack. At this moment, the entire army of the Tianzhao God domain moved. Not a single Tianluan realm cultivator was left behind. They all rushed towards Jun Mo's direction to help. Die. The Tianluan of the Tianzhao divine realm were not afraid of death. As long as they believed in the deity king, they would be reborn even if they died temporarily. But if Jun Mo died, all the Tianluan that went out today would die with him. There would be no reincarnation, and they would completely disappear from the chaos. Divine soldiers, divine generals, and countless shouts resounded throughout the battlefield. Upper extremity, Heaven Overseer, Fenwei, and Xian Qi also sensed the danger Jun Mo was in, and all of them wanted to help regardless of their own safety. Then, a very tacit scene took place. Shura, Slayer, Yu Demon Lord, and Divine General Mo2, who was restraining Xian Qi, kept their opponents busy. They didn't expect to kill their opponents when they panicked, and they didn't even want to severely injure them. After all, their opponents' strength and skills weren't for nothing. They just wanted to hold them back, and that was enough. In fact, the restraining power of the slaughter world was far more than that. When the Tianzhao divine army moved, all the Shura divine generals on Shura Mountain intercepted them. No one gave any orders, as if they were supposed to do so. The cause of all this was Qin Hao. What he did next was to slay the god prince. Tamanaji. Save Jun Mo frantically turned back towards the army of the Tianzhao god domain. He looked at the countless guardian divine generals and divine guards rescuing them. Usually, the Tianluan powerhouses could travel around the world with just a thought. But for some reason, Jun Mo felt that his father's subordinates were so far away from him, as if they were at the ends of the earth. Shura Mountain's outburst blocked the flood of the Tianzhao divine army. High Extremity, Tiandu, Fenwei, and Xian Qi couldn't free themselves. All the subordinates of the Tianzhao divine king were restrained. The only one who still had strength left was the divine prince of the Yunzhe divine realm, Tamanaji. Jun Mo shouted Tamanaji's name, but he couldn't utter the words, "Save me." He and Tamanaji were both divine princes. In the past, neither was willing to submit to the other. Now, how could Jun Mo ask him to save him? Even if his life was in danger, he couldn't say it. But Jun Mo believed that Tamanaji would understand his meaning. When he shouted his name, the divine prince of the Yunzhe divine realm should have understood his thoughts, because he really needed help. "Heavenly Sound God Lord, let me help you." Tamanaji shouted at Heavenly Sound God Lord, who was fighting with you, Mo God Lord. However, he ignored Jun Mo and turned to charge toward Heavenly Sound God Lord's battle. The moment Tamanaji moved, all the Tianluan forces left behind in the Yunzhe divine realm naturally attacked the Devil Soul Guards. After all, they had to obey Tamanaji's will. Jun Mo watched as the other party led a large group of Yunzhe divine realm experts to surround Mo God Lord. As he fled, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Was Tamanaji leaving him in the lurch? Although Heavenly Sound God Lord's cultivation was inferior to Mo God Lord's, he had cultivated in the Southern Heaven Buddhist world and cultivated Buddhist divine power. He could use many Buddhist divine abilities. Even if he couldn't defeat Mo God Lord, he could at least restrain him. Moreover, Tamanaji had led the rest of the Yunzhe divine realm army to deal with a mere Mo God Lord. Such a style was clear as day. "Haha, it seems even the heavens can't save you." Qin Hao's cold voice came from behind him. Spear images and sword lights filled with death intent followed him like malicious spirits. Jun Mo had no choice but to turn around. In front of him, the Azura guards had transformed into a wall that blocked the heavenly edict divine soldier outside. "Do you really think you can defeat me? Can you really do it? Can you do it? You're a piece of trash." In the eyes of Jun Mo, you, Qin Hao, are a piece of trash, a piece of trash, a piece of trash. his shouts reverberated through the world, his curses filled with unwillingness and helplessness, as well as a sliver of fear. Junemo had never known what fear was, and his father had never taught him. But now, without a teacher, his emotions were filled and devoured by a feeling called fear. Then, Junemo took out an item that didn't belong to him. It was a divine item he obtained from the Sword World's deity lord, Sword God Wu-Ji. The innate deity king's bone. Resplendent streams of light revolved around the hand bone. It radiated with an extremely vast and boundless aura of the way of the sword. It was as if it was not a hand bone but a sword, the sword of an indestructible god king. Junemo finally smiled when he held the deity king's bone in his hand. The sword world had sacrificed so much to protect a certain person from escaping. But who would have thought that Qin Hao would die under the sword world's divine item? Ha 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 ha, this is sword god king's Dao bone, left behind by a young deity lord called Wu-Ji. Back then, he was so pitiful, nothing was left of him except for this Dao bone. It's as if he was presenting it to me. Junemo tossed the hand bone out and infused the Tian Zhao's divine intent into it. As if it was injected with life, the hand bone burst out with a blinding light and turned into a dazzling divine sword. Arrogant laughter pierced into Qin Hao's heart like thorns. Every time Junemo repeated Wu-Ji's name, Qin Hao's soul felt like it was being sliced into countless pieces. Scenes of Wu-Ji's death flashed before his eyes. Wu-Ji died under the upper extreme palm. Dong Sheng was forced to use the deity release to open a path for Qin Hao to escape. Daisakong came riding on the dragon just to keep Wu-Ji's remains, but he was vaporized along with the dragon. The 6 elders of the academy were all killed by Shiju and Fun Wei. His teacher, the blind sword deity release, only left a scratch on their bodies. The unforgettable scenes were etched deep into his bones, and Qin Hao roared with hatred. His spear will and sword will were infused into the 14 killing moves, and they all rushed towards the deity king's sword in front of Junemo. It was supposed to be the sword world's divine item, the souls of countless sword cultivators. But now it had become Junemo's shield. Junemo was not worthy. Chapter 22:11. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Distorting Junemo's divine power. The 7 spear lights carried blood-red killing intent, and the space was frozen by the ghastly slaughter Dao intent. The 7 sword shadows bloomed with a pale white evil light, and they were filled with the extremely evil power that Qin Hao had erupted with in his rage. The 14 killing moves completely condensed into a physical attack, and the void battlefield was filled with blood and death aura. They attacked Junemo, who was hiding behind the King of God's sword. Junemo laughed wildly, and under the protection of the King of God's sword, he shouted and shouted at Qin Hao happily. Ever since he got the Sword God King's hand bone from the Sword World, he had been comprehending it every day and night. Although Junemo did not cultivate the way of the sword, and could not strengthen his sword intent. However, this hand bone allowed him to comprehend some of the true essence of the Tao. Now that he had poured in the divine power of the heavenly decree, even if he did not cultivate the sword, he had activated the boundless sword intent of the King of God's sword in the hand bone. The hand bone instantly condensed into a sword, which was enough for him to look down on all things and stand in an invincible position. Qin Hao wanted to kill him? How could he kill him? In front of the King of God's sword, Qin Hao did not have enough power to kill Junemo. With the same level of cultivation, unless Qin Hao reached the Divine Master Realm, it would be extremely difficult for him to break through. He would even be severely injured by the King of God's sword that radiated from the hand bone. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The surging spear radiance and sword radiance arrived at the same time, and the 14 killing intents all attacked the peerless godly king's sword. This godly sword suddenly shook and released an incomparably mighty divine brilliance, illuminating the entire massacred godly world. Looking from afar from the wilderness, a huge and dazzling godly sword phantom erupted in the Milky Way, like an ancient godly spirit, majestic and unstoppable. Boom! The spear radiance and sword radiance shattered at the same time. Mo2's beloved divine spear, which he had poured his heart and soul into, disintegrated instantly. Under the terrifying divine light, only a broken sword hilt was left of the great void sword. It spun and flew toward Qin Hao, and condensed into a cauldron halfway. It was full of holes of different sizes, as if it would shatter completely with a touch. 1. The terrifying divine radiance did not stop because of this. It continued to radiate toward the boundless heavens and earth, turning into countless wisps of sword will that swept through the heavens. Just as Jun Mo had guessed, Qin Hao had failed to kill him. Now, he had suffered a backlash from the hand bone and was enveloped by the sword god king's remaining Tao intent. Figures evaporated one after another. Under the radiance of sword god king's will, be it the Tianzhao divine generals, the Shura guards, the 4 divine realms of the ancient underworld, or the Tianluan of the 2 divine kings' forces, were all vaporized. Not even a divine king could save the vaporized Tianlun. The power of a single sword intent was already so terrifying. And at this moment, Qin Hao, who was enveloped by the sword god king's Dao bone, wasn't facing just one Dao bone? Swish, 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 swish. Sword light filled the sky. Qin Hao felt as if he was in a universe of swords. Endless sword qi entered his body, pierced his flesh, and fused with his blood, Tianluan, divine power, and even his divine soul and will. At this moment, a tragic cry came from Qin Hao's mouth and spread throughout the battlefield. He felt as if he had been instantly sliced into minced meat by the sword god king's sword intent. The pain was unbearable. Ha 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 ha, is this ironic? The person that the sword realm risked everything to protect will one day mysteriously die under the supreme divine object of the sword realm. How laughable, how sad, and how wonderful! Jun Mo's face was filled with complacency as he laughed wildly. He was hiding behind the heaven-shocking divine sword, admiring everything. He saw Qin Hao's entire body being pierced by the sword light. Those terrifying sword intent particles seemed to be radiating from his body, instantly becoming riddled with holes. The scene was simply spectacular. How delightful, how delightful! Truly satisfying. Jun Mo had never felt so comfortable before. It was as if he had accumulated a huge amount of resentment and was able to release it at this moment. It was simply boundless joy. He watched as Qin Hao's body gradually melted. Those unextinguishable evil spirits were also evaporated by the sword god king's sword intent. At this moment, Qin Hao was like a withered tree that had lost its dense branches and leaves. The evil spirits on his back had disappeared, causing him to become bare. His life was also heading towards decay. In his first life, his bones were crushed and his soul extracted. When he came back, he forged a perfect Tianluan. But what could he do? Even if he had the support of the Dao Sword Realm, cultivated the Massacre Dao intent in the Massacre Realm, and used the Reincarnation Mirror to temper his divine Dao for 30,000 years, he still lost to Prince Jun Mo. Trash. What a piece of trash. A lowly bastard with a rotten life. How can you compare to me? Watching as Qin Hao's figure slowly disappeared in the radiance of the sword intent, Jun Mo couldn't even sense his remaining aura. He couldn't help but let out a deep breath. Dead. Finally dead. He was completely dead. He couldn't kill Qin Hao no matter how hard he tried. Now, Qin Hao had finally died in the hands of Jun Mo. Although the method of killing Qin Hao wasn't ideal, Jun Mo originally wanted to use his martial arts to crush Qin Hao. He wanted to torture Qin Hao ruthlessly so that Qin Hao would never be able to make a comeback. However, dying to the sword Dao destruction was actually quite a laughable way to die. If you think that you can turn the tables with the help of the sword god King's Dao bones and successfully kill me, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint you. A familiar voice rang out from an unknown location in the void. It seemed to carry a sigh of enlightenment. This caused the smile on Jun Mo's face to freeze. Then, in the void, Qin Hao's body, which had been melted by the radiance of the sword god King's Dao intent particles, actually slowly reconstructed his body. Jun Mo's mind shook violently. He looked at this scene in disbelief. His soul stopped at this moment. How is this possible? The attack of the sword god King's Dao intent didn't kill him? If Qin Hao had become a divine master, Jun Mo wouldn't have found it strange that this attack couldn't kill him. After all, the amount of sword god King's Dao intent he could use was limited. However, Qin Hao's cultivation was the same as Jun Mo's. After being attacked by the sword god King's Dao intent, how could Jun Mo believe that he didn't die under the sword god King's Dao of the sword? At this moment, strands of sword god King's Dao intent surrounded Qin Hao. As the divine particles surged, they slowly reconstructed Qin Hao's body. Then, a pair of eyes that emitted a purplish gold light opened. Qin Hao's aura underwent a metamorphosis at this moment. He still looked the same, but the aura he gave off as he stood there was like an ancient god that had come back to life. He gave off an inviolable and unshakable pressure. No one could discover that the halo floating around Qin Hao's body was actually the same as the sword god King's Dao intent. The two seemed to be resonating and breathing together. You colluded with Tamanaji and brought the Heavenly Mandate army here. If Upper Extremity and the Sky Supervisor are your backing and the Divine Cloud Pool Realm is your support, then your trump card is the God King's Bone? Qin Hao's purplish gold god eyes were like sharp swords as he stared at Jun Mo's ghastly pale face. If the sword god King's hand bone really was Jun Mo's trump card, then Jun Mo would die soon. Qin Hao gently raised his arm. As if it was filled with magic, the God King's Dao intent sword that was protecting Jun Mo strangely lost control. It severed its connection with the Heavenly Mandate divine power and floated towards Qin Hao's hand until it was firmly grasped. All of this happened without any obstruction, as if it was only natural. Just a moment ago, Qin Hao also thought that he was going to die. Instead, the sword god King's Dao intent that surged into his body gave him an incomparable sense of familiarity. Because he also had that Dao intent. The nine heavens sword waterfall rumbled in his ears. In Qin Hao's mind, his consciousness seemed to transform into a small person that was situated in a green sword pagoda. Then, countless sword sounds flew through his soul. Each sword sound was the same as the one in the Academy's sword pavilion. Thinking back to everything, the academy that Divine Lord Avicii built and the training grounds of the academy were originally derived from the ancient void illusion and the sword god King's hand bone. The sword waterfall, sword pagoda, and sword pavilion were all derived from the essence of the sword god King's Dao intent. Qin Hao had been attacked by the sword waterfall, comprehended the 81 swords of the sword pagoda, and listened to the billions of sword sounds in the sword pavilion. His Dao intent, will, and soul were all traces of the sword god King's Dao intent. When Jun Mo took out the sword god King's hand bone and infused it with the Tian Zhao's divine power, the horrifying sword god King's divine light drowned Qin Hao. However, the two were of the same origin. He wasn't killed by the sword god King's Dao intent. Instead, he was nourished by the power of the same origin. Being baptized by the sword god King's Dao intent, Qin Hao underwent a metamorphosis. The fourth divine vein that he didn't evolve in the refining pool was completely formed. How can something so ridiculous happen? Jun Mo mumbled in a daze. His legs trembled uncontrollably. He slowly backed away. Although he was anxious, he didn't move too much. It was as if he was afraid of disturbing Qin Hao. He wanted to get away from Qin Hao, but he was also afraid that Qin Hao would notice him. His emotions were twisted to the extreme. You took out your final trump card to kill me. But not only did your trump card make me stronger, it even became my weapon. Isn't this a sad and ironic ending for you? Qin Hao raised the deity king's sword. His white hair fluttered in the wind and his purplish golden eyes shone brightly. He looked like an innate deity king. Then, he swung the sword at Junimo. The sword stirred up a total of 81 colorful streams that flew towards Junimo like 80 divine swords. Originally, Qin Hao couldn't find a way to kill Junimo. After all, Junimo was Tianzhao deity king's son. He had his father's divine mark on him. Even if Qin Hao killed Junimo on the spot, Tianzhao deity king could still reconstruct his son through faith. This was just like what had happened on the battlefield of Setting Sun Peak. Those soldiers of the North Territory who had fought for Qin Hao had placed their faith in him. Even if they had died in battle, Qin Hao had grabbed their souls from the heavenly Tao and used his divine power to regenerate them. This phenomenon was the same for Junimo. It wasn't that easy to die. But now, things were different. The sword in Qin Hao's hand contained sword deity king's will. Only a deity king could counteract a deity king's law. If he used this sword to kill Junimo, Prince Deity King wouldn't be able to revive. Furthermore, Qin Hao wouldn't let Junimo die so easily. He had a very special way to deal with it. He believed that Junimo would be very surprised after experiencing it. Qin Hao believed that the feeling of having divine power twisted would be more satisfying than having one's soul extracted. Chapter 22:12. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Junmo. The power of the Earth of Filth was the strongest power of the Divine King of the Underworld. Its power far surpassed that of Azura's Slaughter Dao, Yellow Spring's Bone Dao, Guadi's Ghost Dao, and Yumo Lord's Soul-Devouring Dao. It was also the Underworld's strongest reliance. The terrifying thing about the Earth of Filth was that it could completely change a divine Dao Tianluan from its root. Thinking about the various things that happened to the golden skeletons, evil ghosts, Junimo was chasing after the mirror of samsara. Wasn't it because he wanted to increase his cultivation and become a divine king? Fine, Qin Hao had given him the power of a divine king's Dao in advance. Imagine Junimo, who didn't cultivate the sword Dao, suddenly had his divine Dao Tianluan filled with the tyrannical divine king's sword will. What a magnificent sight that would be! Swish, 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 swish. 81 swords flew forward, chasing after Junimo like heroic spirits of the sword world that had passed away. At this time, the void trembled and countless loud sword cries rang out. The void area where Junimo was in had completely turned into a world of swordsmanship. With a speed faster than his, it turned into a cage of swordsmanship, trapping and sealing him. Qin Hao didn't order the 81 swords to kill Junimo directly, but only to trap him. It was as if the noble Prince of God was surrounded by thorns and thorns. 81 divine swords were pointing at him. There was no way for him to escape. Then, a grayish-white evil aura appeared on Qin Hao's back, and turned into a terrifying human head that flew towards Junmo's neck. Father, save me! The Tianzhao army was blocked by the Azura guards, and completely separated Junimo. He was trapped in the center of the 81 swords, and was shrouded by the shadow of his death. Finally, he shouted out 2 words. Save me! He held a bright divine king's seal in his palm, and threw it high into the sky. This was Junmo's strongest trump card, and also his last life-saving charm. This was the seal of the Tianzhao Divine King, and also the source of the Tianzhao race's soul. Vile spawn, you dare? Upper Extreme let out a terrifying roar of anger. As it clashed with the evil Shura, It abandoned its opponent and desperately rushed towards Jun Mo to save him. From a distance, the terrifying Tao diagram that contained the will of desolation blasted towards Qin Hao. Unfortunately, all of his efforts were blocked by the evil Shura. Bang! Slayer was sent flying by Tiandu's fist aura. He spat out boiling hot blood. He had lost count of how many times he had been heavily injured by Tiandu's left and right arms. His divine body was almost penetrated by Tiandu's fist aura. However, seeing that Jun Mo was trapped, the Slayer screamed. He picked up the mirror of reincarnation and pounced on the Tiandu. He unleashed his godly power of slaughter to the maximum. His cold killing intent blended into the Tao of reincarnation and blasted into the Tiandu's body. Fan Wei was escaping. He had only exchanged one blow with Lord Yumo, but he had almost lost his divine soul. He couldn't even defeat the Slayer, and Lord Yumo's divine power was above the Slayer's. Although Lord Tianyin had lent a helping hand and restrained God Lord Umo, saving Fan Wei from danger, Fan Wei still felt that his soul was being controlled by Lord Umo. It was as if a thread of his life was being held by Lord Umo. At this moment, Fan Wei only wanted to escape. He wanted to escape from this terrifying battlefield and this ancient nether region. The battle between White Deity and Yellow Spring was earth-shattering. Their cultivations were basically the same, and they were evenly matched. They were both heavily injured in the fierce battle. Mo2's mystic chi was blocked by Mo2, who had 8 divine veins and immortal-grade heavenly wheels. Even though he wasn't a god master, he was amplified by heaven's might in the massacre realm. After a long battle, his mystic chi was showing signs of not being able to defeat Mo Tuesday. How could he have the time to save Jun Mo? He was about to die in Mo2's hands. Gue Di and Jade Void Emperor were still fighting, and there wasn't much of a commotion. No one had truly used their full strength. The one dying wasn't Tamanaji, but Jun Mo. Saving Jun Mo wasn't Jade Void Emperor's duty, and he didn't want to fight Gue Di to the death. No one could save Jun Mo's life. This time, even if Tamanaji wanted to save him, he couldn't. The Divine Prince of Yunzhe Divine Realm had used all his strength to besiege Lord Umo, but who would have thought that it would backfire? Lord Umo unleashed an even more terrifying soul-devouring and Tao-destroying technique. The divine souls of the divine guards and divine generals around him kept disappearing, and their empty bodies kept falling. Tamanaji was in the same predicament as Jun Mo, and his life was in danger. Therefore, Jun Mo could only rely on himself. He relied on his father's divine seal of Tianzhao, hoping that he could summon a strand of the Divine King's will to descend and kill Qin Hao. The incomparably resplendent Divine King's seal hung high in the sky, releasing the sacred radiance of the Divine King's will. It seemed to light up the entire desolate ancient nether region, and the light radiated and spread across the entire wilderness. However, what made Jun Mo despair was that there seemed to be an extremely ancient power hidden in the heavenly Tao. That invisible power prevented the Divine King of Tianzhao's will from descending. His life was hanging by a thread, and he was bitterly calling out, but he was restrained by the ancient nether region. It was only now that Jun Mo remembered something. The massacre domain had a curse left behind by the ancient Nether King when he died. The power that was obstructing his father's will was the power of the ancient Nether King's curse. PFFF. Blood splattered down Jun Mo's noble neck as the evil spirit's head opened its mouth, almost biting off Jun Mo's neck. At this moment, Jun Mo stopped shouting and gave up all his struggles. This was because as Qin Hao's purplish-gold eyes flickered, Jun Mo realized that he could no longer control his divine power. On the contrary, another kind of divine power surged into his heavenly wheel, replacing his divine power of the Tianzhao race. This power was sharp, indestructible, willful, and indomitable. Its sharp blade could slash apart everything in the world and shatter the primordial heavens. What exactly was it? Was this the divine power of the sword Tao? Ah, a mournful howl reverberated in all directions. Jun Mo's body trembled wildly as if he had been electrocuted. The boundless will of the sword god king poured into his body through the evil spirit's head. His divine king bloodline began to boil as if it was on fire. His entire body was filled with violent sword will. This power was too strong. With Jun Mo's cultivation, he could not control the violent divine king's sword will that was rampaging in his body. His divine bones, his flesh, and even his divine soul were all pierced and cut apart by the devastating sword will. Even his divine king bloodline was about to evaporate. He wanted to mobilize the remaining Tian Zhao divine power to resist, but he realized that his remaining divine power was not enough. There was not much left, because his heavenly wheel had turned into a dazzling sword-shaped wheel of light. If God Master Avicii was still alive, if the 6 elders of the Academy were still alive, if all the sect masters and sect masters of the Avicii divine domain were present, they would definitely cheer and be shocked by the spectacle on Jun Mo's body. Look, such a pure power of the sword Tao. He was simply a 1 in a million genius of the sword Tao. He was the qualified successor of the divine king that the sword world had been searching for. However, the pain of having his heavenly wheel and divine power distorted was worse than death for Jun Mo. He wanted to resist, but he was powerless. That kind of heaviness and powerlessness was exactly the same as when Qin Hao witnessed the destruction of the Avicii divine domain. Didn't you want to become the divine king? You mobilized an army and brought 8 god masters to the Avicii divine domain to destroy the core of the sword world. You should have known that you would be pierced by 10,000 swords. Jun Mo, all of this is what you deserve. This is retribution. Qin Hao floated in the air, quietly watching. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and the divine king's sword in his hand flickered with sparkling divine light, like flowing drops of tears. Through his evil power, he continuously poured the sword intent of the divine king's sword into Jun Mo's heavenly wheel, transforming and molding it, allowing Jun Mo to possess the world's purest and most flawless divine power of the sword Tao. At this moment, Jun Mo's body was pierced by sword light, and the sword intent he emitted was even purer than Wux. Unfortunately, Jun Mo could not control the surging power, and the eruption of the sword intent would only devour him. Senior Avicii, Senior Sikong, Teacher Blindsword, the various sword elders, Senior Dongxing, do you see? The radiance of the sword Tao has finally bloomed on Jun Mo's body. A tear fell from the corner of Qin Hao's eye. Today, he would have his revenge for the Avicii divine domain. Severing love's curse before his death had come true. Sword cultivators could die, the sword world could be destroyed, but the sword Tao would never end. Sooner or later, the radiance of the sword Tao would bloom on the Heavenly Edict clan and cause them to suffer a miserable death. And today, Jun Mo was only the beginning. Buzz. In the vast void, an incomparably dignified face dispelled the thick haze of the slaughter world and floated above everyone's heads. The moment this face appeared, the world fell into absolute silence. Even those as strong as Wu Xiang, Zhang Ji, Tiandu, and Bai Shen were instantly suppressed. Their heartstrings stopped beating as if they had lost their breath. Fa. Father, Jun Mo's body was covered in sword holes, and the sword-shaped wheel around him was abnormally distorted. Under the shattered God King armor, he could not control the eruption of the sword Tao. His body gradually dissipated, revealing a divine source full of holes. The divine source's aura was so weak that it was about to dissipate. The heavenly edict God King's gaze fell on the miserable Jun Mo. He did not even have time to stabilize Jun Mo's injuries. The next moment, the heavenly edict God King, who had used all his strength to open the planar channel and send a wisp of his will down, was swallowed up by a terrifying ball of cursed divine light. That dignified face instantly collapsed. When Junmo saw this scene, it was not out of anger, but because he knew that he was powerless to save himself. He spat out a final mouthful of blood from his throat as he fell down from the sky with his body covered in brutal sword chi. Just as his consciousness was about to dissipate, he saw 4 dazzling divine veins at the edge of Qin Hao's wheel. The opponent that Junmo had looked down on and despised in the past, Qin Hao, who could not even be compared to air, had actually surpassed him. Chapter 2213. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The Slayer fell. Your Highness! Shangji roared and broke free from the evil face's azure field once again. He didn't even care about the killing technique that the evil face had unleashed behind him. He completely let down his guard and rushed toward the falling Junmo. He wanted to save Junmo's life by a breath. Shangji's Tao was extremely profound, and his Tao was complete. He was infinitely close to the level of a godly king. After he let go of all his defenses and burst forth, he formed an extremely powerful force and successfully caught the son of Tian Zhao, godly king. But what followed was a bone-chilling scimitar of death that sank deep into Shangji's back. It cut through the light wheels and embedded itself in his flesh. Shangji felt his entire body being frozen by a murderous intent almost instantaneously. This attack had already caused him to be severely injured. Tiandu, bring up the rear. Shangji shouted madly. Even though he was injured, his godly power surged toward Junmo's broken body to protect his godly source. He transformed into a beam of godly light and shot out of the slaughter world. After Shangji left with Junmo, all the Tianzhao army's heavenly wheel divine guards abandoned the battlefield and chased after Junmo in a frenzy. Bang! A heavy fist smashed down, and the Slayer's face was smeared with blood. He hugged Tiandu's godly body with both hands and wrapped his arms tightly around it. With this last heavy blow, the Slayer's light wheels that were supporting him on their own collapsed. The terrifying godly power of Tiandu's fist penetrated all the way down and shattered the godly source of the uncrowned king of the slaughter world. Immediately, the servant who had been diligently watching over the Azura's home died. As his arms loosened, he fell to the foot of Azura Mountain. Mirror of Reincarnation. After killing the Slayer, Tiandu reached out his hand and firmly grasped the Mirror of Reincarnation in his palm. He was about to turn into a beam of light and flee. As a result, the moment the Tiandu turned around, he was met with a pair of bloodthirsty eyes. The moment he met the Azura evil face's eyes, the Tiandu's hand that was holding the Mirror of Samsara suddenly trembled. The Chaos Divine artifact unconsciously slipped out of his hand. You deserve to die. Shura clenched his hand and clenched it into a fist. He threw a punch that pierced through Tiandu's light wheels and into his chest. Tiandu let out a furious roar as his body erupted with raging great desolation divine intent that slammed into Shura's fist. Flesh and blood splattered. The Shura's fist was instantly reduced to white bones. However, this pale skeletal hand was still like a sharp knife. It stabbed into the Tiandu's body. When it was only an inch away from the Tiandu's godly source, the Tiandu frantically retreated. He screamed like a ghost and disappeared in front of the Shura god. It was as if he had never appeared. Translation Lord, translation. In another battle, Tamanaji's palms formed a shield as a sacred cloud of light gathered in front of him to resist the corrosion of God Lord Yumo's soul energy. At this moment, Lord Heavenly Music's 10 fingers were flashing as he played the ancient divine guqin that was augmented by the Buddha. Boundless Buddhist golden light spread out, forming a 10,000-foot Buddha phantom image. At this moment, the entire sky was filled with Sanskrit chants as though thousands of monks were chanting. That 10,000-foot Buddha phantom image put its palms together as countless swastikas emerged from its body. The swastikas shrouded Lord Yumo's head as though it was going to purify him from the world. Originally, I wanted to fight a little harder. At least from the looks of it, I can be considered to have worked a little harder. Perhaps I could make Fifth Sister feel a little heartache. But you guys are not cooperating at all. You demon master grumbled. He saw that Qin Hao had successfully injured Jun Mo, and that noble divine Prince Tianluan had been affected by the earth reversal. His divine origin was nearly destroyed, and it was unknown if he could survive. As Shangji and Tiandu left, the Heavenly Edict army retreated from the battlefield. Lord Yuemo knew that the time had come. He could no longer continue his act. Extinguish the soul. With a soft bellow, boundless darkness engulfed the world like the will of a ruler. Immediately after, countless spirit shadows swept out from the Demon Lord's body, dispersing the golden light in the sky. The chanting of Sanskrit in the void came to a stop at this moment. In the next instant, Lord Heavenly Music's 10 fingers stopped playing the ancient divine Guqin. The 10,000-foot Buddha phantom image in front of him suddenly collapsed, and blood spurted out from his throat. Lord Heavenly Music's body emitted a white soul aura. As Lord Yuemo reached out with his hand, the soul aura was sucked into his palm. Uncle White! Yuliuji screamed at the top of his lungs. His voice was so shrill that it was even more shrill than Jun Mo's, who was covered in sword intent. 1. A majestic white light descended. Yunzei White God had pushed back God Lord Netherworld and appeared next to Tamanaji. With one hand holding Tamanaji and the other grabbing the shoulder of God Lord Heavenly Music, who had lost part of her soul, he turned into a beam of divine light and flew into the 9 heavens, disappearing from the universe. Once White God left, the Jade Void Emperor, who was in a stalemate with Gue Di, immediately retreated. All the Yunzei divine generals also began to withdraw from the battlefield. However, these Yunzei divine realms Tianluan soldiers were not as lucky as the Heavenly Edict army. Because the enemy had left first, they were left behind to guard the rear. In the end, they were intercepted by the Tianluan soldiers of the 4 divine realms of the ancient underworld. In a few breaths, countless people had died. In short, only 50% of the divine guards had fled with Tamanaji. No, let me go. Great God Umo, let me go! The vast battlefield gradually fell silent. The 2 divine king armies had retreated, leaving behind only a one-armed man. Because his soul was under the control of Lord Umo, Fenway felt like a thread had been grasped in his opponent's hand. Fenway wanted to sever it, but he was powerless. With Jun Mo's departure, he was the only one left on the battlefield. One could easily imagine what Fenway was feeling. In front of him were Azura, Yellow Springs, Gue Di, God Lord Umo, and the countless Tianluan soldiers and divine generals of the 4 divine realms. Aside from that, Fenway instinctively glanced in a certain direction. Just as he turned his head, a streak of light that contained the sword intent of a god king shot over, piercing through Fenway's forehead. As the powerful sword intent shattered his soul, the laws that spread out also devoured his divine source. A mighty god lord of a divine realm with 7 meridian divine glyphs, someone who had once slaughtered without fear in the sword world, someone who could summon the wind and summon the rain, had now been slain in a single blow by a perfect Tianluan with 4 meridian divine glyphs. Fenway lost all signs of life and his body fell from the sky. Although his death was due to the great pressure from the environment, it was undeniable that Qin Hao's current strength was undeniable. With 4 meridian divine glyphs, a god king sword in his hand, and the support of the ancient underworld's heavenly Tao, there was no doubt that Fenway would be able to kill someone with 7 meridian divine glyph. Normally, Fenway might have been able to put up a fight, but now, he had been killed by Qin Hao in a single blow. This was the strength of a perfect Tianluan. Even Jun Mo could not stop the current Qin Hao. What a pity! Although the quality was a little poor, it was still a tonic. Lord Umo looked at Fun Wei's falling figure and stuck out his tongue in pity. Qin Hao dispersed the sword intent in his hand. The God King's sword's light dissipated and turned back into a bone. Holding the bone, Qin Hao felt a strange warmth in his palm. Old Fourth, my condolences. God Lord Yellow Spring's huge purple-gold skeleton was slowly covered by flesh and blood and returned to its previous appearance. He came to the front of the Azura evil face and looked at the corpse that the evil face was holding. He could not help but feel sad. The Slayer had died at the hands of the Heaven Supervisor. He had died fighting for the Slaughter World. Chapter 22:14. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I am Tamanaji outside the ancient underworld in the vast wilderness. A large area of divine light rolled up countless figures with broken armors. Against the raging gales, they surged forward violently. Upper extremity had Azura's death god's saber on his back. Saber light flickered in his flesh as the terrifying law of slaughter continued to erode his body and destroy his divine will. His aura grew weaker and weaker. However, upper extremity did not dare to stop for even a moment. He held a tattered body tightly in his arms as he desperately used the divine escape technique towards the Archean realm. Your Highness, hang in there. I will bring you back to the divine realm of Tianzhou, back to the deity king's side. You must hang in there. Upper extremity kept calling out. It was as if as long as his voice stopped, the descendant of the divine king of Tianzhou would fall into eternal slumber. At this time, Jun Mo's situation was extremely dangerous. His entire body was covered with terrifying sword holes, and a majestic sword intent was rampaging wildly in his body. Sword Dao Law particles were constantly gushing out from the sword holes all over Jun Mo's body. It was as if life was flowing out of them, and they couldn't be suppressed at all. Qin Hao had reversed Jun Mo's heavenly wheel, changed the source of the deity king's bloodline and extracted his original strength. No matter how strong upper extremity's divine Tao was, he could not completely suppress the rampaging sword will in his body. After all, upper extremity was not yet a deity king. There were also differences between deity kings. The rampaging sword will in Jun Mo's body belonged to the primordial realm. Upper extremity looked at the gloomy divine origin that was riddled with holes and surrounded by countless cyclones of sword Dao. The extremely sharp light rays were still cutting at it. Upper extremity had no choice but to bring Jun Mo back to the divine king of Tianzhou's side. Perhaps there was a miracle that Jun Mo could survive. I'm a godly prince. My destiny is extraordinary. I'm destined to become an invincible existence in the future. Today I actually lost to a trash. That bastard. He reversed my bloodline power. Tears of humiliation flowed from his eyes. Jun Mo, who was so weak that he was about to reach the end, had never felt so defeated before. Fighting with Qin Hao was even more humiliating than losing to the descendants of other divine kings. He knew that he had been too arrogant and condescending. It was precisely because he had never taken Qin Hao seriously that he had always thought that victory was within his grasp no matter what had happened to him. It was precisely because of his arrogance that he had received an irreparable lesson today. Now that Tianluan's divine power had been reversed, was he still qualified to be the son of God of the Tianzhou clan? Compared to this, defeat was even more unbearable for him. This would be Jun Mo's eternal stain. It would be like an eye-catching mark stuck on his face, and he would be mocked by all the living beings in the untainted universe. Shangji fell silent. Indeed, he couldn't find an excuse for Jun Mo because Jun Mo had indeed lost. He had lost completely. However, as long as he could return to Tianzhou deity king's side, there was still a chance to salvage the situation. The innate deity king's power was the most mysterious existence in this world. Senior Shangji, wait for me! Shouts filled with fear came from behind. Tamanaji, who had just escaped from you Demon Lord, was terrified. He was rolling and crawling as he frantically chased after Shangji. The ancient underworld's strength was too terrifying. In today's battle, the two Deity King factions couldn't even handle them. They even almost lost their lives here. Just the thought of it was terrifying. What can I do for you, Your Highness? Shangji held on to Junemo, whose divine source was on the verge of dissipating, and glanced coldly at Tamanaji. Junemo, he can still hold on, right? Tamanaji asked carefully. He also took a peek at Junemo's condition and was shocked. Thanks to Your Highness' blessing, His Royal Highness is still breathing. Shangji's tone was cold. If it weren't for Tamanaji turning a blind eye to Junemo's danger, Junemo wouldn't have ended up like this. Although Junemo had underestimated his opponent, Tamanaji's actions were even more disgusting. In that situation, do you think Your Highness can save him just because he wants to? Yunza Baishan asked. Were the Tianluan of the ancient underworld's 4 realms just for show? If the upper extremity thought that strong enemies were mere decorations, then why couldn't they defeat the Azura and save Junemo? Shangji glanced at White Deity, and saw that one of his arms had turned into white bones. There was a very strong aura of death around it. Even someone as strong as White Deity could not reconstruct his flesh. Shangji immediately shut his mouth and did not say anything else. Everyone in the Yunzhe Divine Realm knew whether Junemo could be saved or not. If Tamanaji didn't bring everyone to suppress you Demon Lord, Junemo wouldn't have ended up like this. Cough, cough, it's my fault. I thought Junemo wouldn't be defeated so easily. Forget it, what's done is done. Now, saving Junemo's life is the most important thing. As Tamanaji spoke, she saw Junemo's lips opening and closing. Junemo was so weak that he couldn't even speak. After a heavy sigh, Tamanaji said, Tianluan's power is twisted. If we bring him back to Tianzhao Deity King in this state, I'm afraid, Your Highness. Tiandu shouted, interrupting Shangji Yu. Tamanaji's lips twitched and he said, That Deity King's bone contains innate sword Deity King's purest sword Dao. It's not something that can be dispelled easily. Forgive me for being blunt, but according to Junemo's situation, he won't be able to last until Tianzhao Deity King dispels the sword Dao. Tamanaji wasn't sure if the sword Dao could be dispelled. Just suppressing it would take a lot of effort. Sword Deity King and Tianzhao Deity King's Dao were on the same level, but Junemo was on the verge of being killed by the sword Dao. Tianzhao Deity King would have to be careful. To suppress and dispel Junemo's Deity King's sword Dao, the best way is to go to Sword World and have a strong sword cultivator unblock it for him. Actually, it's not a bad thing to be forcefully infused with sword Dao. After all, this is the innate Deity King's sword Dao. But I don't think anyone in Sword World will help Junemo. Junemo destroyed a celestial realm in Sword World. How could the sword cultivators in Sword World help him unblock his sword Dao? Furthermore, according to Sword World's current situation, there weren't any suitable candidates. That God Lu and Long Ao's cultivation levels were still not high enough, they had to be at least half Deity Kings. Prince Yu, are you talking nonsense? Tiandu asked in a lifeless tone. Tamanaji smiled. He wasn't angry and continued, just take it as nonsense. Other than the sword cultivators, there's another person who can help him. Who? Shangji's eyes immediately locked onto Tamanaji's face. Me. Tamanaji raised his head slightly. At this moment, the gods couldn't help but slow down, and their expressions all changed. You think it's impossible? Tamanaji could tell that Shangji and Tiandu didn't trust him. There's a bathhouse in Yunzhe Divine Realm that was created in the chaos. It hides the innate primordial Dao and has the effect of returning to its original state. It used to be a place to deal with criminals. When Tianluan who committed a crime was thrown into it, it would erase his godhead and melt his divine power, turning him into a mortal and returning him to his original state. As he said this, Tamanaji looked at the miserable Junimo and said, "Although this might be a little hard for Junimo to bear, it's still better than dying. Erasing his divine power, erasing his godhead and returning him to his original state." Once Junimo was thrown into the bathhouse, it meant that when Junimo came out, he would lose his Tianluan and divine power, becoming no different from an ant in the mortal world. However, the bathhouse in Yunzhe Divine Realm was the only place that could erase the Sword God King's Tao will in the shortest time possible, because it was also a place of primordial chaos. The Sky Supervisor's expression became extremely ugly. Was he really going to throw the noble divine Prince Junimo into the bathhouse to deal with criminals? Senior Shangji, listen to Tamanaji. Take me to Yunzhe Divine Realm. At this moment, an extremely weak whisper came from Shangji's arms. Everyone looked over and saw Junmo's tears of blood flowing from the corners of his eyes. How much courage did it take for the high and mighty divine prince to throw himself into the bathhouse, erase his divine power, and return to his mortal body? However, Junemo knew that Yunzhe Divine Realm did have such a wonderful place. Moreover, in his current state, just as Tamanaji said, Junemo would probably be tortured to death by the violent sword intent before Tianzhao Divine King expelled the Divine King's sword intent from his body. Entering the bathhouse and erasing his divine power, Junemo did not want to do this, but he really had no other choice. "Your Highness, is there really a need to do this?" Shangji wanted Junemo to reconsider. Once he entered the bathhouse, how many years would it take for him to return to the Divine Prince of the Divine Realm from the mortal world? Yes. Junemo nodded with tears in his eyes. Erasing the Tianluan and divine power, but not erasing their memories. This was the way to deal with criminals in the bathhouse. It made those high and mighty Tianluan remember who they were, but they would lose their previous cultivation. Sad, now such a punishment had fallen on Junemo. However, he was different from those dirty criminals. He was a divine prince. He believed that the divine realm would provide him with everything he needed in the lower realm. Everything, he would regenerate in the shortest way. Since Qin Hao was able to regenerate his Tianluan when his divine soul was on the verge of dissipating, could it be that Junemo was inferior to the bastard of the senior Pil clan? He could also regenerate to become a god. When he returned to the divine realm, he would return the sins and humiliation he suffered today to Qin Hao 1,000 times, 10,000 times. This time, Junemo would make Qin Hao not even have the chance to regenerate. Okay, let's go to the Yunzhe Divine Realm. Shangji took a deep breath and looked towards a corner of the wilderness. He was about to change the route back to the Archean Realm. Leave Junemo to me. I will bring him back to the Yunzhe Divine Realm. You and the Heavenly Supervisor are also heavily injured. You need to hurry back to the Divine King and let him eliminate the murderous nature of the Azura and the Bone Dao law of the Netherworld. Tamanaji opened his hands towards Shangji. Suddenly, Shangji paused and stared sharply at the Divine Prince of the Yunzhe Divine Realm. He seemed to be thinking for them, but he had undoubtedly sent away all the people around Junemo. If Tamanaji wanted to do something now, the consequences would be, I am a divine prince. Junemo is already like this and is about to fall into a mortal body. What do you think I can do to him? Tamanaji was so angry that he wanted to laugh. Shangji was too disrespectful. Shangji did not reply. Instead, he lowered his head and looked at Junemo silently. When their eyes met, Junemo nodded weakly. Then I will leave it to your highness. I will report everything that happened today to the Divine King of Tianzhao, including his highness's trip to the Yunzhe Divine Realm. Shangji handed Junemo, whose divine essence was about to dissipate, to Tamanaji. The White God did not forget to activate the Wilderness Divine Intent to stabilize Junemo's injured body. However, at the moment of separation, Shang-Ji's words carried a hint of warning. He meant that if anything happened to Junmo, even the slightest accident, the Yunzhe divine realm would definitely be involved. This would ignite a war between the divine kings. Chapter 22:15. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The sleeping Ingsha and the awakened Myrath divine light split into two, one headed towards the Yunzhe divine land and the other returned to the Archean world. Tamanaji had taken Junmo away. Whether or not he could eliminate the tyrannical sword god king's sword will was up to fate. Shang-Ji and Tian-Du were also seriously injured. They needed to return to Tianzhou Divine King's side and borrow the Divine King's will to eliminate the laws of Shura and Yellow Springs. This battle had a great impact on all three sides. Not only did they suffer heavy losses, but it also made the forces of the myriad worlds recognize the power of the ancient Nether region. Even though the Nether King had been dead for many years, Shura and Yellow Springs still had the strong foundation of the Divine King's forces. They could be bullied and bullied. It was not easy for any of the Divine King's forces to completely destroy the four worlds. Even if they put in all their effort, their vitality would be greatly damaged, and they would not be able to recover. Unless the Divine King personally came and broke the curse of the Nether King's will. In the Dark Palace, four powerful figures walked side by side. They walked through a deep and cold passage and arrived at the depths of Shura Palace. This was the absolute forbidden area of Shura Fong. The closest people of the four Nether Princes were buried here. Gently putting down the corpse in his arms, the evil Shura face looked at the Slayer who had been accompanying him all this time. The Slayer was peacefully lying in the black crystal coffin, as if he was sleeping. His expression was so calm. However, Shura knew that Slayer had left him forever, just like Ingsha. Slayer's life was taken away right in front of him. He was a good boy. He was loyal, fearless, attentive, and kind. Yellow Springs felt sorry for Shura and envied him because the Nether King had given Slayer, his servant, to his fourth son. The same perfect celestial wheel, the same pure slaughtering divine power. Yomi had once wondered if the Slayer was Azura's shadow, or perhaps it should be said that he was their sixth brother. However, no one knew about this except for their father, the Nether King. "Fourth brother, why don't you revive him?" Umo asked. The Slaughter World had all sorts of traces of the Slayer. As long as the Azura was willing to help, he could grab a portion of the will of the way from the heavenly Tao and reconstruct the Slayer's spirit. Shura didn't answer. He shook his head slightly. He could resurrect the Slayers, but they wouldn't be the Slayers they used to be. The divine power of Tian-Du was too strong. The law had already completely destroyed everything about the Slayers. The remnants of Tao that were captured from the heavenly Tao of the Massacre World could at most be pieced together into a fragmented person. How was that different from a puppet? After the Underworld War, the Azura's divine soul had been scattered. Guarding the Slaughter Realm was too lonely and too tiring. Just let him rest. He didn't leave. He will always be with me. Shura stared at the lifeless Slayer in the crystal coffin and revealed a warm and gentle smile. The Slayer would stay in the Azura's life. Just like the person in the crystal coffin beside him, he would always be here to accompany the Azura. At this moment, Huang Quan, Gue Di, and Umo subconsciously looked at the even larger crystal coffin beside them. It was carved with the Netherworld's red spider lilies. When their first glance fell on the quiet, beautiful, and slightly mischievous little face, their hearts trembled. They hurriedly lowered their heads, as if they wanted to avoid looking at it. They couldn't bear to continue looking at it. Inside this huge crystal coffin, which was emitting a strong cold air and seemed like it would never melt, slept a woman. She was the Nether King's most beloved princess, Ingsha. So similar. Shura took a few steps forward and gently stretched out his hand to touch the sleeping Ingsha's face. He recalled the scene when Mori had appeared. They were so similar, as if they had been carved from the same mold. However, at this moment, he felt endless coldness from his fingers. Creak. Guadi clenched his fists tightly. Intense hatred and killing intent appeared in his flickering eyes. The battle with the light divine world had taken the lives of Ingsha and many divine masters of the Nether Realm. Today, Junimo and Tamanaji had led the Divine King army and killed the Slayer. When did the Nether Realm, which was once famous in the desolate era and feared by all the Divine Kings, become so easy to trample on? It was tolerable. Relax your fist. Before you completely comprehend the desolate era and reach the primordial realm, don't let hatred drown your pitiful reason. Huang Quan glanced at Guadi. Revenge on the current Divine King of the Light Divine World? Or fight his way into the Heavenly Order Divine Realm and the Cloud Pool Divine Realm? If Guadi really wanted to do this, he might as well die under Fifth Sister's coffin. It was better than dying in the hands of others. Mo Tuesday, Shura called out. His voice traveled through the deep passage to outside the hall. Bring him in. Yes. Outside the Shura Palace, many divine generals and red-robed divine guards were busy suppressing their injuries. Qin Hao was one of them. At this moment, Mo2 looked at Qin Hao and nodded at him. Then, Qin Hao stood up and followed Mo2 into the hall. This battle was very intense. Although it looked like a stalemate, danger was everywhere. If any of the four divine kings were defeated, the situation would fall beyond redemption. If it wasn't for Qin Hao defeating Junimo and causing chaos in the Heavenly Order Divine King army, the outcome would be uncertain. Qin Hao stepped into the dark and deep passageway. This was not the path to the main hall. The light in the Azura Palace was weak, and there were many forks in the road. Each passageway seemed to represent something, and the destination was different. Qin Hao did not know where Mo2 would take him this time. As expected of the innate deity king bloodline, Tianluan and divine power were distorted by sword deity king's sword Dao, but Junimo didn't die on the spot. Qin Hao didn't know if Junimo was dead or not. Even if he was, he wouldn't be far from death. Even if Shangji successfully brought him back to Heavenly Order Deity King, it wouldn't be easy to suppress Sword Deity King's Dao will through the Deity King's power. This might cause Heavenly Order Deity King to kill his son himself. Being killed by his own father, how would Junimo feel? Qin Hao didn't have enough time and his cultivation was limited. He couldn't cast the ultimate power of Sword Deity King's Dao Bone. Not only him. Back then, Sword Deity Wu Ji did the same. He fused the Sword Deity King's bone into his body, which caused the Tianluan to mutate and rise to the immortal grade, forming the Wu Ji divine world. In that battle, although Deity Lord Wu Jian was able to suppress Sword Deity King's power with the Deity King's bone, he was still no match for Shangji. Talent, spiritual roots, and cultivation were all limited. Even with the innate Deity King's bone, Deity Lord Wu Jian's full power was limited. Just like Qin Hao, he wanted to kill Junimo, but his opponent's bloodline was too strong. The skeletons, evil spirits, and spirits that were distorted by the divine power were no match for Junimo. The skeletons were affected by the earth and would die instantly, whereas Junimo had the innate Deity King bloodline, which greatly offset the earth's effect. Even Sword Deity King's brutal sword will couldn't kill him instantly. This is... Following Mo2, the air grew colder and colder. Qin Hao felt like he was walking into hell. When he stepped into a huge tomb, he saw Shura, Huang Quan, and the others. In front of them was a solemn black crystal coffin. As they got closer, Qin Hao also saw the figure in the coffin. Almost instantly, Qin Hao's breath stopped, his eyes widened and his heart stopped. Chapter 22:16. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Muri's choice. She wore a phoenix coronet and a golden hairpin in a bun. She wore a bright red robe, and her dark red lips gave her an eerie beauty. The woman in the black crystal coffin was like a ghost bride sleeping peacefully. Qin Hao stared blankly at the woman who looked exactly the same as his senior sister. If not for the fact that the woman in the coffin had a completely different temperament from Muri and that his senior sister's soul was in his heavenly wheel, he would not have been able to tell the difference. Could this be the princess who had fallen because of the Netherworld War? Aren't they very similar? The Azura looked at the sleeping Ing Sha. Even though he did not turn around, he knew the expression on Qin Hao's face. Yes, they are very similar. Qin Hao nodded. At first, he did not understand the impact of his senior sister's appearance on the Azura, but now he understood. Her name is Ing Sha. She was born in this world the same year, the same month, the same day, the same time. The moment we opened our eyes, the first thing we saw was each other. The Azura turned around and looked at Qin Hao. On the day of the war between the underworld and the light world, in order to save me, Ing Sha was hit by the great light technique of the eldest son of the light god, who is the current divine king of light. Her soul was purified and only this divine body was left. It was to protect his sister's divine body that the Azura's soul had been destroyed. He did not feel that it was a pity. On the contrary, he was filled with joy. At least when he was sad and had no one to talk to and no place to vent, he could still come here and confide in his sister. "I'm sorry, I feel sorry for you." Qin Hao did not know what to say. Even though he was not from the underworld and was not the brother of the Azura, he could completely stand in the Azura's perspective and feel the pain and sorrow. When he found out that Muri had fallen, Qin Hao felt the same as the Azura. However, he did not expect that it was a trap set up by Zhan Wu. The goal was to encourage him to move forward and help him become a god. Zhan Wu had his own difficulties. His original intentions were good, but Muri lost her imperial body because of this and became a ghost that was on the verge of death. Of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, senior sister was the only survivor of Migres Peak. She had lived and died with Qin Hao just like a real sister. He could really understand Shura's feelings of losing his sister. However, why did he feel that the Azura's eyes had suddenly become strange? "Don't tell me you're thinking of." Qin Hao was halfway through his sentence when he understood what the other party was thinking. He lowered his head and looked at the divine body in the crystal coffin. Indeed, senior sister needed a corporeal body. "It's up to you," Lord Yu Demon interjected. After he finished speaking, he stared slyly at Qin Hao's face. The corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile, as if he had already guessed the result. The body of the daughter of the Netherworld King, perfected great Tao, perfect heavenly wheel, profound Tao like Shura, and pure massacre divine power. How precious was that! In the Eldritch world, the perfect heavenly wheel alone was enough to make countless divine Tao ants envious. Although Ing Sha was dead, her godly body was still intact. She still retained the strongest part of the Netherworld King's Tao will, as well as the foundation of her Tao that was comparable to Shura's. How to choose? There was no need to think about it. Lord Yu Demon believed that Qin Hao definitely had an answer in his heart. After all, not everyone could forge a perfect heavenly wheel. Furthermore, after being revived, she could directly possess the power of a divine king and stand at the peak of the divine masters of the myriad worlds. Qin Hao's heart thumped. The godly body given by Shura was simply too powerful. However, his senior sister's bloodline was not bad either. She was one of the 14 primordial spirit gods and a descendant of the Phoenix god. Furthermore, she was filled with the power of the original realm. There was a high chance that she could forge a perfect heavenly wheel. However, in terms of Tao, she seemed to be too far away from the Netherworld princess who had fallen. It was really hard to choose. Seniors, is there a possibility that while my senior sister inherits Princess Yingsha's godly power and Tao, she can also preserve her own bloodline? Qin Hao didn't want to choose. He wanted everything. If you want her to die more thoroughly, that's a good idea. Shura's expression instantly turned cold. He had already given his own sister's body to the other party. What was he going to do? He still despised it? Did he despise Yingsha's massacre Tao will for not being strong enough, or was his Tao will for not being strong enough? When the Tao wills clash and the divine source is released, only one source of power can be activated. I can't deny that you have obtained the ability to recreate Earth. However, even Earth cannot go against the laws of the primordial world, Lord Yu Demon said. Sigh, what a pity. Qin Hao lowered his head and sighed. Huang Quan and the others couldn't help but want to beat him up. You can't make the decision. Just ask her and let her make her own choice, Shura said impatiently. All right, my senior sister should indeed make her own choice. Qin Hao's divine intent moved and the wheel of light bloomed. A weak and blurry divine soul halo slowly appeared from the wheel of light. However, the moment Muri appeared, she didn't say anything. She only floated beside the crystal coffin and lowered her head to look at the person lying inside. The error-free chapters of Primordial Pill Venerate will continue to be updated in the new book C Pavilion. There will be no advertisements on the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new book C Pavilion. If you like Primordial Pill Venerate, please bookmark. Primordial Pill Venerate's new book C Pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 22:17. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. They had the same appearance, but different temperament. Fate made them look at each other between life and death, as if they were looking at themselves. How should they choose? Muri did not know either. Inheriting Yingsha's Tao will and heavenly wheel divine power would require them to abandon the phoenix bloodline that was passed down from their ancestors. If it was placed on anyone else, it would be extremely difficult to cut off their bloodline with their clansmen. However, Muri was clear that inheriting Yingsha's Tao will and divine power, directly inheriting her perfect heavenly wheel, and overcoming the calamity of the Ascension God realm in the process, leaping to the peak of the Divine Master realm, would undoubtedly play an important role in Qin Hao's current situation. Thinking until here, Muri already had an answer in her heart. She turned to look at Azura and said, I am willing to abandon my bloodline and completely inherit the princess's power. Decisive, straightforward, and without any hesitation, Muri's reply caused Azura and the others to be slightly shocked. Senior sister, are you serious? Qin Hao asked. Muri turned to look at him and revealed a warm smile. The princess's perfect heavenly wheel and possesses one of the strongest divine powers in the netherworld. Such conditions are something that I can't even ask for. Although these were very valuable, they were only secondary. What Muri wanted to do the most now was to have enough power to help Qin Hao, so that he would no longer have to wander around and hide everywhere. Qin Hao fell silent. Looking at Miao Li's beautiful eyes, he understood the true thoughts of his senior apprentice sister. He rejoiced at this. What virtue and ability did he have to have the best senior apprentice sister in the world by his side? Very good, this is also the result that I want to see. Azura finally smiled. If he only let his sister's body come back to life, but she lost her original aura and abilities, it would indeed make him very sad. Because when Muri chose to keep her bloodline, she also undoubtedly wiped away the last trace of Yingsha in the world. The current result was really quite good. Even if his soul was changed, being able to see Muri using the Slaughter Tao will was like seeing Yingsha in the world. I am now beginning to understand why you are so determined to help this kid, Sai. While Huang Quan shook his head and felt, His eyes flashed with intense expectation. Guadi and Umo also faintly emitted a trace of excitement. All right, since you have decided, you are not allowed to go back. However, whether you can perfectly merge with Ing Sha's body or not, it will still depend on this kid's ability. Azura, as he pointed to Azura and Qin Hao. Using ordinary methods, it was impossible to merge two living beings with Tao Will Azura Art Will. Even the Divine, Azura Divine God translation, Divine God, Azura Divine, Divine King, Azura God God translation realm, Master and translation realm, into translation in translation, Translation, realm translation, realm in and realm earth, was Assur translation be realm. Was realm Asasura in realm that was that I sisters, senior sister masters, senior sister and princess senior I senior sister. Qin Hao became serious and slightly nervous. This matter concerned Muri's resurrection. He could not afford to make any mistakes. No, you can't do it. At least, you can't do it now. Umo shook his head repeatedly. Your cultivation is too weak. You simply can't control the tyrannical slaughter Tao intent in my little sister's body. If you carry out the fusion now, this little girl's soul will definitely die in your hands. Guadi was absolutely not joking. Moreover, Qin Hao's use of the filthy earth was not very good. It was still fine if it was used to kill people. He did not have to worry about it at all and could directly reverse the heavenly wheel and God power. The key was to save people. He had to do it perfectly. Then what should I do? Qin Hao was also at his wits' end. Ing Sha's cultivation foundation was similar to Azura's. Could it be that he had to cultivate to become a divine king before he could transfer his senior sister's body and shape her soul? 10,000 years, 100,000 years, or 1,000,000 years. Or even longer, it's not too difficult. Azura took out the reincarnation mirror, which still had the blood of Slayer on it. He handed it over to Qin Hao heavily. Use the Chaos Divine Tools Reincarnation Tao to increase your cultivation as fast as possible. My netherworld itself has the power of reincarnation Tao. This is the best place for you to increase your cultivation. Other than that, Azura glanced at Huang Quan and the others. You need to follow my three brothers to cultivate the Tao of Bone, Tao of Soul, and Tao of Incantation. When you've condensed divine force, you'll be able to use filthy earth again, which will result in a qualitative leap. In the past, Azura did not understand what the filthy earth Tao will was. Now, he faintly understood that the existence of the filthy earth should be the combination of Father Hell's Tao will. In other words, the Azura killing path, the Yellow Spring Bone path, the Nether Devil Soul path, and Guadi's necromancy curse were all part of the separation of the impure earth. When their Tao intents were combined, the impure earth would be produced. Maybe at that time, a new divine king would be born in the netherworld. The theory seemed simple, but it was more than difficult to implement. Even if Azura's bloodline could cultivate the Bone Tao and other Tao wills, would Huang Quan be willing to teach him? The four brothers were not willing to submit to each other, and at one time they disliked each other. While they wanted to become divine kings, they certainly did not want the other to become underworld kings. However, with the arrival of Qin Hao, all of this was broken. Qin Hao was not from the netherworld, but his body was engraved with the shadow of the netherworld, especially the innate filthy earth divine power. If a new underworld king was born in the future, it would not be Azura or Huang Quan, but Qin Hao. Plop. Qin Hao, who did not respect ghosts or gods, nor heaven and earth, and was only willing to bend his knees to his parents and teachers, bowed solemnly to the four princes of the ancient nether realm. Seniors, I cannot repay the great kindness you've shown me and my sister. I'd like to be your apprentices and help me cultivate the supreme divine arts of the underworld. This. Huang Quan and the others looked at each other. They did not refuse to teach, and were willing to lead Qin how to expand into a new realm. It did not matter if he repaid them or not. With a little imprint of the netherworld, he could not get rid of it even if he wanted to. However, this kid directly knelt and became their disciple, which was out of everyone's expectations. It was quite grand. Get up, I will teach you the Bone Dao cultivation method. Huang Quan was the first to speak. The composition of your spirit seems to be quite complicated, and even I can't see through it. However, the more complicated the spirit, the easier it is to cultivate the soul Dao. You demon master suddenly noticed that Qin Hao's spirit seemed to have been reborn. The imprints were densely packed, and some were riddled with holes while some were shining brightly, as if he had been reborn more than once. I believe there is no need for me to teach you the ghost spirit incantation. You have already experienced it yourself. However, I indeed do not have a disciple. Since you are willing to be my disciple, I will reluctantly accept you. After Guadi said this, he suddenly felt a sense of absurdity. As for the slaughter Dao, you have already achieved it, so there is no need for me to lead the way. You only need to understand life and death. Life is built on the foundation of death. Understand the meaning of slaughter. Only then can you truly control life. Shura knew that Qin Hao had cultivated the slaughter Dao will the moment he entered the slaughter world. After such a long time, he had almost honed it to the extreme and had even derived his own law of slaughter, the God Execution Dao. Now, Shura had nothing else to teach, and Shura Feng's various resources had already been tilted toward Qin Hao. Teachers, is there really nothing else for me to do? Qin Hao raised his head. Giving a favor without asking for anything in return. It was really rare for such magnanimity to appear in the netherworld figures who symbolized death and curses. There is.